Would the recorder please call the roll?
Mayor Bennett. Absent. Member Kaiser.
Present.
Member Tom Anderson.
I am too.
Member Nanke.
Here.
Member Leung.
Here.
Member Ossick. Absent. Member Hoy.
Here.
Member Cook.
Here.
Member Lewis.
Here.
Member Nordijk.
Present.
Member Tigan. Absent. Member Shirok.
Here.
Member Moore Green.
Here.
Member McCoy. Absent. Member Barker.
Present.
Member William Anderson.
Here.
Member Sund.
Here.
Member Milton. Absent.
Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, they didn't want to be here late tonight, so they just covered up.
Thank you. Moving on to public testimony. Thank you, Officer Jacobs. Just a reminder that individual testimony is limited to 3 minutes. A yellow light will appear at the podium when 2 minutes have passed, and the red light will signal the 3-minute limit. Groups are asked to select a spokesperson whose testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. After the spokesperson's testimony, all those belonging to the group in the audience may indicate support by a show of hands. If other members of the same group have additional information that was not shared by the spokesperson, their testimony is limited to 3 minutes. I would like to begin with Ron Sturba, followed by Linda Walmark. Thank you.
Good evening, Ron Sturba, 520th Street Northeast, Salem, board member of Simca Neighborhood Association. Good evening, city councilors and staff and residents. I'm here because residents for 2 years now have come to our neighborhood association and asked for some help. And in this budget, I'm hoping there's some funds to put up a sound wall on Cordon Road where Cordon goes over Mission Street. The speed limit I would like reduced right now. It's the cheapest source of reducing the noise to go from 55 miles an hour to 45. The elevation of Cordon Road is equal to the second floor level of the apartment complexes right next door. So I'd like to see a sound wall go in, not an earthen berm. After I walk that area, determine that's the best way. If ODOT decide to put in a intersection, I should say interchange there, this sound wall can be placed in the area where it won't have to be removed. The next thing here in the picture, you see up there it says North Sanaham Highway. That's Highway 22. And to the left is going toward Lancaster, and to the right, just past the W, is Cordon Road. If you take a look at the open field just below North CDM, that's Bill Regal Park. And right above it on the other side of the highway is Miller Elementary School. And presently, the children from that community on the south side of North Santiam have to go to Lancaster by Home Depot through the parking lot at Winco to get to school or take the bus. They can't ride their bike. So I'm proposing that the city of Salem get a hold of ODOT right now. Deadline is May 31st to have a pedestrian path bridge put across into the elementary school and the park so the kids can go to the elementary riding their bikes. So at this point, I would say there's a couple other items, pedestrian paths. I won't get into it deeply, but it's on Turner Road at the Lakeside Village. There are no sidewalks or paths from this neighborhood onto Turner Road, none. So I'd like the city staff to consider, sit down and talk with me, and we'll discuss those proposals at a later time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sturba. Ms. Walmark, followed by Caroline O'Brien and Betsy Belshaw.
Good evening. My name is Linda Walmark. I live in Ward 3, and I'm here speaking on behalf of 350 Salem, Oregon, which is a local climate change activist group. You know, as I was preparing for this evening's presentation, I thought about different approaches that I could use. And I thought, well, maybe I would come and talk about the Our Salem process and how it really isn't designed at all to create a climate action plan. And I thought maybe I would come and just talk about straight finances. You know, how about renewable energy is a great investment for the city that would pay itself back fairly quickly. And I thought, well, maybe I will list some of the costs that come with inaction on climate action or climate change. But I ultimately rejected all those approaches because it's putting climate change in this bucket of business as usual. You know, that business as usual bucket where we look at all the priorities of the city's needs and we think about how we can meet all those different challenges and stretch our budget as far as we can. You know, and responsible public servants such as yourself always do that and always will. We always will have budget challenges and we will always meet to talk about them. But climate change is anything but business as usual. Climate change is a four-alarm, full-on, existential, unprecedented threat to humanity. It's not a bucket, it's a dump truck, and we need to respond accordingly. One of our American governors put it this way. He said, you know, we're the first generation to feel the sting of climate change, and the last generation that can do something about it. Well, now here you are in a position where you can do something about it. And you know, we have this wonderful opportunity right here, right now. Mother Nature has been very abundant, and Mother Nature is very tolerant, but we have pushed her to her limits. We're not talking here about politics or economics. We're talking about chemistry. We're talking about physics. We need to respond in that basis. This is existential. So we need to beat it on that level. Imagine, if you will, if you had a child, God forbid, that had cancer, and you said to that child, you know, honey, I'm sorry, but we have house payments to make, we have car payments to make, we can't really fund your cancer treatments right now. Would you do that? Well, of course not, because you know that there is a point of no return, and we can't come back from that. And climate change is like that kind of cancer. There is a point of no return, and delay can mean death. Now, you counselors know me. I've been coming here and speaking on behalf of 350 for quite a while. You know that I'm not given to histrionics, and I'm not given to any kind of hyperbole. But truly, we are the ones in the position right now, the last generation that can do something about this. So please, really understand and realize the consequential impact of this moment in your gut. And please own your own role in it. And please provide the
Thank you,
leadership
Ms.
we
Walmark.
need. Thank you.
You're welcome. Caroline O'Brien, followed by Betsy Belshaw.
My name's Carolyn O'Brien. I live in Kaiser, but everything that Salem does regarding an climate action plan affects me and everybody else who lives by me.
Can you move the mic a little closer, please, so we can hear you?
Yes.
Thank you.
You said my name, I'm not going to repeat it. I live in Kaiser.
You're good.
I live near the Kaiser station, about less than a mile from the freeway. And I mentioned that any action that Salem takes toward the climate action plan affects me and my neighbors, the animals, the plants, everything around all of us. Starting right about now, I can't sleep at night with my windows open because of the fumes from the freeway. That's just something that affects me right now. I also want to mention the students that spoke to you all in the past, recent past. I want you to remember them as I read the rest of my comments. House Bill 2020, the Green Energy Jobs Bill, is now moving through the legislature and has been endorsed in concept by the City Council. It will generate hundreds of millions of dollars per year in new revenue for us to invest in a clean energy future for Oregon. The money will be invested in clean energy solutions like affordable solar, energy efficient upgrades to homes and businesses, and green transportation options. Some of the money may come to the cities to invest in their communities. I'm thinking that it'll come to Portland and Eugene and Corvallis and Milwaukee, who have the climate action plans. At this point, Salem does not have one. I don't think we're going to be in line for any of that money. before these other cities, and there are other cities too. Think about it as you consider the budget. Funding that climate action plan without delay is essential to our being able to benefit from the Clean Energy Jobs Bill that is very likely to pass in this legislative session. Without a climate action plan, Salem may be left behind and miss out on millions of dollars that could push our city forward, help our city economically. Please don't let us get left behind. And I just want to bring up again, those young people that spoke before don't have a vote yet, but they let you know what they're going to be dealing with. They know what they're going to be dealing with. So please fund this climate action plan, at least with the consultant. And in the future, the revenue will be there to fund the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Brien, it looks like you have a question from Member Lewis.
Hi, thanks.
I'm feeling you might have a question.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, I'm not an expert on the House Bill 2020, but are you saying there's provisions in that House Bill that specifically say unless a city doesn't have a climate action plan, they won't benefit from any of the hundreds of $1 million generated?
That isn't what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying, think about it. It's likely that the money will go, because there's the book I mentioned before when I've spoken here. If you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else, is the title of the book. If we don't have a plan, we don't know where we're going, so the other cities will more than likely get the revenue before we do. That's what I'm saying.
But I just want to make sure, there's nothing in the bill that states that.
Anything else? Thanks.
Thank you. Betsy Belshaw, followed by E.M. Easterly.
Betsy Belshaw, excuse me, I live in Ward 4. I'm here with my Minto Brown Park Patrol Coordinator hat on tonight. And don't faint, but I'm not asking for money. However, I am asking that you not forget that we do need another park ranger desperately. And please think about that in terms of planning for the next budget. It's bad, because I tell everybody, these people that do these horrible things were not raised by my mother. And it's getting worse instead of better, and the 5 parks that he covers doesn't have to do it. So we need another park ranger. Please think about it for the next budget cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. E.M. Easterly, followed by Steve Anderson.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Budget Committee. I'm E.M. Easterly, Ward 8. You have documents in front of you that were passed out earlier. I wanted to do it slightly differently, but let's go through it anyway. Good evening. Please turn to page 191 in the Budget Book, Volume 1. The reason I'm asking you to do that is that I request that the narrative language associated with Transportation Project Item 8 on that page, which is Project 71503, towards the bottom of the page under carryover projects, be revised. First revision. Please remove reference to initiation. Marine Drive was actually initiated over a dozen years ago when apartments were constructed east of Wallace Road, north of Herritt Drive. Second request. Please remove reference to Glen Creek Road to Cameo Drive as the only focus for the 2008 budget funds. I say budget, I mean the bond funds that are still there. That will allow acquisition of right-of-way along other surveyed portions of the Marine Drive spine during budget year 2019-2020. In my third request, please look at the graphic that has been handed to you. It is showing the spine of Marine Drive. Review the Marine Drive graphic. The green areas are sections already owned by the city. In fiscal year 2020, I ask that you turn red sections of the Marine Drive spine to green by purchasing more right-of-way. The funds are available, and this move is a clear indication that the city is positively responding to a congestion task force recommendation. Briefly, it's written down before you. There is a display on my written report showing where the city in the past has secured right-of-way both within and outside the Salem city limits. I ask that you use this as part of an affirmation of the ability of you as a community, as we as a community, and you as council and budget committee members, take these funds that are already there and use it for that purpose. Thank you very much.
Mr. Easterly, it looks like you have a question from Member Anderson.
Thank you for coming down, EM. I'm looking at your map, the
Thank
colored
you.
map, and I believe that the black line that is kind of meandering in and out of Marine Drive, that's the city limits?
The city limits, forgive me, I'm not sure, it's a pink line. It might be a black line. I don't have it in front of me.
I think it's the urban growth boundary.
Yes, it is. That's the UGB line.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any additional questions? Thank you. Testimony from Steve Anderson, followed by Phil Carver.
Good evening, Steve Anderson, 3240 Geller Road, Northwest, Salem, Oregon. This has been handed out to you, the diagram here that shows Marine Drive. And this is provided to the Budget Committee and Council as clarification of several issues we talked about. Basically, there are 6 sections, 1 through 6, along the spine, which we're calling the 5th Avenue to Herrick Drive spine, that are currently red, that do not belong to the city. The green ones belong to the city or have been built by the city. The pink one deals with a question that Councilor Kaiser asked, and Peter Fernandez confirmed that are optional purchases that could be done now or later. The cost for these ones are on the back of your sheet. The total cost for this is down at the bottom of about $1.3 million. And so this gives an idea of what we're suggesting is, first off, turn the red to green and complete the spine along Marine Drive. The proposal that's in the budget now is to do number 9, which is to buy the right-of-way there and construct that section. It's a 3-box section that is going to cost at least $3.5 million. Councilor Nanke has brought issues up over time about cost effectiveness. The purchase of right-of-way is what's being suggested now. Design and construction can be done later, but purchase the right-of-way along the spine of Marine Drive. In addition, a point of reference, at 6, you can see a little red spot there. The city has invested currently about $500,000 in that, it's a low-income housing project. That purchase there and this completion of this spine will help that project go forward and take off some of the uncertainties so investors can continue to work on that project. But here's a graphic with the numbers on the back to give you an idea. 1 through 6, we want purchase for sure. Council has the right to do 7, 8, and 9 and still do it for under $3.5 million. So thank you.
Question from Member Lewis.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for coming down. Just want to make sure that the area in pink, starting at Glen Creek, is also an option for the city council to purchase right-of-way.
Right. All 9 of those are an option for city council to purchase. The recommendation is do 1 through 6.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page when it came to the 2008 Streets and Bridges bond measure and the discussion about Marine Drive. It was the Marine Drive that's in the transportation plan, which does start at what starts at Glen Creek.
Yes, and it did say if that was not a viable option that you could do the 5th Street alignment. But the primary discussion was, as you said, Councilor, with the option to do 5th Street or both.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
thanks.
All right?
Yeah.
But hopefully this graphic will help clarify some of these issues and help the council and the committee make some decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Phil Carver, followed by Lori Doherty.
Good evening, Councilor Cook and others on the Budget Committee and audience. My name is Phil Carver. I live at 1007 Newport Road Southeast, which is outside the city limits but inside the urban growth boundary. and is one of the properties ripe for eventual annexation, as is happening along that area. And one of the things about a climate action plan would address is not just reducing emissions from the city and within the urban growth boundary, which is the footprint of the greenhouse gas inventory that has just been completed, but also would enable the city to understand the impacts of development on runoff into Mill Creek eventually. That whole South Salem area drains into Battle Creek, which drains into Mill Creek. And then Mill Creek comes down and during times of flood, like the 1996 flood, floods the city. And what we need is a good study of how much that development in the area I live in would impact the city, and if there's methods or development requirements that could reduce the amount of runoff from peak storm events, because it's really clear from the science that peak storm events are getting stronger. Not they will be stronger, they are already stronger. And that's because of the simple fact that a warmer climate means more evaporation off the ocean, and when the water gets in the air, what goes up must come down, and it comes down often over land. And so the ocean is definitely warmer off the Oregon coast. So this is happening now, and we're seeing more intense storms already. So this is an example of the kind of thing that would be funded, could be studied in a climate action plan, not just the reduction of emissions, but adaptation to the changing climate. And so I recommend that you keep the long-term planning position that's currently slated for removal and provide money, something on the order of $50,000 for a consultant to aid the city in developing a climate action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carver. Lori Doherty, followed by Eddie Benford Ross.
Chair Cook and councilors, thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Lori Doherty. I live in Ward 2, and I'd like to speak in support also of funding a climate action plan. And I'd like to suggest that the funds be used to hire a consultant, because a consultant can bring experience and capacity to develop a plan, and would be able to look over various city departments and areas of the city, not tied to just one department, could analyze opportunities, across a wide spectrum of things. So that's a suggestion that I have. I'd like to also talk a little bit to the necessity and the urgency of doing something and why we all need to do our part. Yesterday I was at a meeting and there was a young Latino man. He's an adult leader of a youth group here. And the issue was talking about environmental and climate justice. And he talked about the big existential issues. He talked about how, lands are drying up, both in developed and developing countries. Lands are being overwhelmed by floods. People are losing their land, their livelihoods, their homes due to sea level rise and, and these causes, from climate change. But then he told a very personal story. He said that he was a child who was really attuned to his environment. He grew up in California with his family in Mexico that he visited very often. So he's speaking kind of to both places. And he said he was fascinated by bugs as a kid, insects. He loved insects. And now as an adult, he wanted to share that fascination with his niece and nephew. And he took them out looking for bugs. And he said they had a hard time finding bugs. And then he talked about, visiting family in Mexico. And he said he goes back fairly often over years, and he's seen the decline there also. He's seen the decline. And he kind of laughed. He said, no more scorpions, no more tarantulas. And, maybe some of us don't think that's such a bad idea. It's a bad idea. We are affecting things that we don't know what we're doing. We've known for a long time that this was happening, that climate change was doing things. We are only beginning to understand the consequences of it, and the consequences are, serious. So I really ask you to put Salem on the map and do a really good and effective work on building a climate action plan for our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eddie Bedford Ross.
Good evening, councilors, committee members, and others. My name is Eddie Benford Ross, and I live at 1000 Judson Street Southeast. I am a sophomore at South Salem High School, and I am here to urge you to fund the Climate Action Plan. A few months ago, the United Nations released a startling statistic. they announced that the world must cut its carbon emissions by 40% by 2030 to keep climate change in check. But the UN's discoveries about climate change did not stop there. In the last week, they released another terrifying revelation. They announced that humanity has altered the natural world at an unprecedented rate and will continue to do so. The nations, states, and countries and cities of the world must do everything we can to combat climate change. Now, the United States as a whole will not act on climate change until at least 2021. Therefore, we have even more incentive to start acting from a local level. In Salem, this manifests as funding this climate action plan. With a budget of $600 million, the city of Salem can and should allocate roughly $50,000 for the funding of a climate action plan. Climate change will affect my generation. It will affect every single generation that comes after me. My generation does not have the power to decide budgets. We do not have the power to vote. We do not have the power to draft legislation, but we are worried. We are scared about our future and our children's futures and their children's future. We are scared about the city's future, our state's future, our country's future, and our planet's future. So we are doing everything we can to support climate action. We are marching, we are lobbying, we are speaking out. Right now, every second counts in regards to the climate crisis. Your actions or inactions on climate change will have life-altering consequences for every single generation to come. Right now, the youth are watching you. The future generations are watching you. It is up to you to decide what legacy you want to leave for this city of Salem. Do you want to be known for your failure to act on climate change while you still could? Or do you want to be known for doing what you could to combat this global crisis by funding the Climate Action Plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benford-Ross. Is there anyone who did not have the opportunity to sign up but who'd like to provide comments this evening? No. Okay. Fun time to stand up. All right, so moving on. Let's see here. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from May 1st, 2019 meeting?
So moved.
I have a motion from Member Lewis. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Member Sund. All those in favor of accepting the May 1st, 2019 Budget Committee meeting minutes as provided, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. I would like to ask Budget Officer Jacobs to review the action items and the handout material, including any additions to the agenda.
Thank you, Chair Cook, and good evening, everyone. We do have extensive agenda items this evening. You have both an original agenda and then an additions agenda as well was placed at your desk. And so I'm going to do a bit of a mashup of those two agendas. That's a very official budget term. I'm going to do a little bit of a mashup between the two agendas. So the first item on the agenda that I would like to draw your attention to is the action item, and that's errata sheet 2, and that's a correction to a Scrivener error. And while the error described in errata sheet 2 is a number error, it does not have an impact on any of the underlying data supporting the city budget and requires no rebalancing. It was a last-minute correction that we made everywhere in all of the other numeric displays, including all the financial summaries, except for the numeric table on page 138. The correction reduces the amount for contingencies by $910 to $1,174,960. And the total for the result area is reduced by the same amount to $12,973,260. And so I would need a motion and vote to approve this Scrivener correction.
Motion. So moved.
Second.
So it looks like I have a motion from Member Nordike and a second from Member Anderson. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the Scrivener corrections as recommended by staff, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Motion passes.
And so I'm moving on to information items. That is Agenda Item 5, and it appears both on your original agenda and the additions agenda. Beginning with Information Item 5A. This is the summary of Budget Committee actions, and so this would be the summary through your last meeting of May 1st. The page that appears as Attachment 3 lists information and reports requested by the committee. Some of the questions or requests with a response date of May 8th are provided as written reports. Several responses will have short presentations. For a few items on the list, staff is recommending that the issue transition to the City Council. And in one instance, the tourism promotion area, which you heard about last week in public testimony, staff is currently proceeding with the implementation planning for that item. So in just in the interest of time, there are some things that we are recommending that actually be forwarded to the council. So I'm moving on to item 5B. This item responds to a question about the collection of transient occupancy taxes on short-term rentals in Salem. Item 5C responds to the request for the fire department's response time maps with both 2017 and 2018 data. And then on the original agenda, items 5D and 5E, and then on your additions agenda, and this is where it gets complicated, items 5H through 5N, item 5P, items 5R through 5T, and item 5V, and at least 5 email that are waiting for me back at my office are all correspondence expressing support for the Youth Development Program. Also on the additions agenda, item 5Q is correspondence from Budget Committee member Paul Tigan, who was unable to attend this evening, but before leaving town provided this message. It was forwarded via email to Budget Committee members on Tuesday, May 7th. Item 5U on the additions agenda includes responses to Budget Committee member emailed questions. So this is very similar to what we did last week for questions that were sent to staff during the course of the week and responses were provided. We wanted the Budget Committee to have the benefit of those responses. And then because I still have a little water left in the information fire hose, the additions agenda also includes items 5W and 5X, the fiscal year 2019 quarterly financial summaries for the City of Salem and the Urban Renewal Agency for the period of July 1st, 2018 through March 31st, 2019. So the third quarter, through the third quarter of the fiscal year. And those items appear in color, and again, they're in at the end of your additions agenda. Now returning to the original agenda, items 5F and 5G, you noticed I skipped those, are presentations by city staff in response to committee member questions. The first responder is Community Development Director Norman Wright, and he will be followed by Police Chief Jerry Moore. Director Wright will be responding to questions about our Salem, initiatives related to climate action, and the impact of the long-range planner position elimination in the proposed budget on the Our Salem project. Police Chief Moore will respond to the current funding gap for school resource officers and Salem Police Department response times as compared to other agencies. And so if Director Wright would join me at the podium, please.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Norman Wright, Community Development Director. I'll keep this brief. There's only 48 slides in this presentation. But yeah, as requested, there's been a number of information requests regarding our Salem, regarding climate action. And so the long and short of it, I'm going to try as best as I can to provide a more vivid picture of how the Our Salem process is specifically designed to take a very holistic view at future growth through our data indicators, understand how our current picture gives us a very clear sense, whether through those indicators or through the information of our greenhouse gas inventory, how all that information helps us better understand how to address future growth, future impacts, specifically impacts related to climate, as well as a broader holistic view of other impacts to the city's livability. Weigh those impacts through a series of long-term policy and planning decisions
weigh those trade-offs and make the best possible path forward for the city's future growth. This process is, again, specifically designed to include and to incorporate climate action in every possible way for long-term, lasting improvement, and it is the best approach that we have as a staff, given our resources and our bandwidth, to address climate action today. Given our staffing, given all of our commitments, given all of our responsibilities, again, this is the best that we can do with these resources right now. I also want to mention, though, regarding the greenhouse gas inventory and our Salem as an actual event, there is a workshop taking place right now, the public workshop being held in another part of the city, where many members of the community are already currently looking at the freshest data that we have, including some draft information on the greenhouse gas inventory. You all, if you haven't received that information, you'll be receiving that very soon. We will also be putting it on the website too. And one of the things that I want to share regarding the inventory itself is that of the 7 cities that we can measure against who currently have a greenhouse gas inventory, in 2 major measures of emissions, we are 3rd best of those 7 when it comes to the emissions. Now, that's not to say that we do not have issues that we need to address, but we're 3rd best when it comes to electrical emissions, when it comes to another component of emissions, and then we are 6th best out of 7 when it comes to transportation emissions. I mention that because in the area where we see an inordinate and unique and outlying impact with greenhouse gas inventories is in transportation. Transportation can only really be best addressed for long-term benefit through something like our Salem process. So my point being that the greenhouse gas inventory is being delivered. It just so happens that the findings that we are seeing there in the data can thankfully be addressed as far as in action with the work that we will be doing with the next phases of our Salem. So with that being said, I want to just show a better example of these indicators, the Our Salem process, and how this does support climate action, as well as other actions and other concerns for, again, the city's growth. So these are the top 20 indicators, i.e. data points, that the community has identified to be of most concern. Just to spell it out for you here, greenhouse gas emissions is one of those 20, but many, many more are distinctly related to and contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, and again, to climate action. So in every way that we can, we're getting a very clear picture through the work that we're doing to see how, as a broad, holistic picture, the city is contributing to climate and can also take new action to improve the trends that we're seeing. So again, it is deeply incorporated in many, many ways beyond just a mere greenhouse gas emission measure. That is included, but many other facets are also accounted for as well. It results in the sort of data that you can basically see illustrated here. This is not to be read, of course, from the screen, but the idea being that we are creating the data to then create data-driven decision-making on a future vision for the city that, again, addresses all of these concerns, climate being included. So the workshop is taking place today. The greenhouse gas inventory is being shared as quickly as we can get it to everyone so that they can all be aware of these impacts. And then as we move on, we're going to have an information report before the council on June 10th to basically suggest and recommend that we continue with Phase 2. Phase 2 involves questions such as what should we change, what should we maintain? The very questions that are endemic to any climate action plan is also, of course, central to this planning effort as well. What are the trade-offs of each choice, be it trade-offs for climate or trade-offs for other concerns? These are all parts of that conversation that will take place in Phase 2, which we again recommend starting in July. Then we would move on to Phase 3, which is the policy and implementation stage, where we would again start to create any of the new policies, any of the new plans that can actively incorporate beneficial action toward climate, as well as many other concerns that the community has voiced with us through this process. So climate is deeply interwoven as an item, as a topic, as an issue within our Salem. And I hope that helps to illustrate how and helps to illustrate the benefits. So finally, there was a question that we were asked last week about staff bandwidth and the impact of the long-range planning position as it relates to our Salem. The position is currently vacant, and so I mentioned that because we are able currently to deliver the Our Salem project in very effective ways, as well as managing other projects such as the multifamily regulation project that we're working on to widen and improve opportunities for development for multifamily housing. We're able to manage both of these projects right now in parallel with our current staff while this position is vacant. So we know the impacts right now. We're dealing with them. We're managing. But there are still impacts, and so the last 4 bullet points that you see here explain what those impacts are. We can continue our work as we're doing it today, but we do have a reduced quality for our outreach. We just simply cannot engage as much as we would like for that simple fact that there is only one long-range planner. We do have extended time frames. We'd like to think that the Our Salem visioning stage is only going to take 10 months. It will likely take longer because, again, of our need to spread out our outreach effort over time. There is the potential for overwhelm if certain legislation is passed, which will then compel our staff to immediately start to act on that legislation and bring our zoning codes up to date to any of the new, again, mandates that come from any possible state legislation. And then additional work is on hold. That work includes the housing needs analysis. It also includes any future neighborhood plans. All of those things are on hold so that we can continue this work that we've already committed to. So there are impacts, but the current work we're doing today can continue. It is manageable given all of these constraints. So I hope that helps, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Director Wright. A question from Member Hoy.
Thank you, Chair Cook. I have a couple of questions relating to your two sections. I appreciate the information about how you intend to have woven the climate information throughout our Salem process, and I think that's very important. What I don't understand is your reluctance to put that all together in a document so we can have a plan to measure against and to point to. Right now, I'm afraid that it's going to kind of get lost in all of this other work, and there's important work that's being done, but we're not going to be able to point it out because it'll be lost within this bigger process. And so that's my goal, and my hope is that we fund this climate action plan so we can actually just call it out and call out the good work that's being done and measure against it and decide what our priorities are. Maybe we need to do something more. Maybe we don't need to do something more. It's very difficult to discern that when it's all lost in this bigger process for me. So that's my concern.
Thank you, Member Hoy.
I have one more.
Oh, please continue.
Sorry, it was a two-parter. And I don't know if you have a response to that, but
Go ahead, please.
Let me do the second one first. So in terms of the long-range planner, I really appreciate that information on that second set of bullets there. The reduced quality of outreach. I mean, we recently went through a project with the State Street Corridor, various other things that were, I think, quite effective. And they were quite effective because of the quality of our outreach, of your staff's outreach. Mm-hmm. And I hate the idea of that being diminished. And when you say extended timeframes, that is a little bit, I'm hearing a little bit of a euphemism there. We're doubling, at least, the time frame to implement our Salem, as I had understood you say last time. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about 2 years now to implement this thing that's possibly the most important thing we're going to do as a council. Right. And so I just don't find those acceptable, and that's why I'm going to support adding back that position.
So thank you, and I completely understand and frankly share these same concerns. The extended time frame, I am being vague there because until we secure our consultant, we can't quite say for sure what sort of time frame it's going to be. We're trying to be as aggressive as possible. So it could be doubled, it could be less. We'll have to wait and see. Now, to the prior comment regarding the interest for a climate action plan, if only as a way to symbolize and categorize and have an inventory of all the things we're doing and will continue to do. just to be frank, we're reluctant to do any work on a climate action plan for the simple fact that we have so many plans already on the books. We have so many plans already on the shelf. And without the resources to then monitor and manage an actual program as a result of that plan, the plan itself will not be able to deliver a lot of the outcomes that I think many people are wanting to see. So in our report that we delivered last week for the Budget Committee, we mentioned, and I'm going to just scroll back up here, we mentioned on the final bullet point here under climate action, the idea of a holistic program or a narrow set of services. A holistic program would require 4 FTEs to actually deliver a full sustainability program of the sort that matches best practices and can capitalize on greenhouse gas inventories and many other types of data that we would want to monitor, many other types of actions that we would want to foster. A narrow set of services would require 2 FTEs. The point here being that as your planning director of sorts, the last thing that I want to do is deliver you all a plan that will then sit on a shelf. And we've suffered that fate before. And so a plan is but one step of many that would need to occur to see any sort of reasonable outcomes, or to expect any sort of reasonable outcomes that could really deliver on what people are asking for. So our reluctance on a plan is first and foremost about that. We do not have the resources right now, and even with a long-range planner, we wouldn't necessarily have the resources to deliver such a plan. But even if we did, it is still just very, very bluntly one minor step towards, again, the sort of action that I think has been discussed, alluded to in these meetings. So that's our reluctance.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. I appreciate that. But we've already taken a first step. We've already taken the inventory, and this will be the second step. If we don't take the second step, why did we do the first step? So that's my...
Sure. The greenhouse gas inventory primarily serves a major function for us of helping us clear the waters on what our real condition is as a city right now. So already the inventory has been fantastic for us to be able to see just how the degree of the problem really exists. We are in certain data, we're actually not so bad compared to other cities. In other data, we are actually seeing a real problem compared to other cities. And so it's had a very positive effect in helping us figure out what kind of vision, what kind of strategy we as a community want to embrace. So it has that benefit already. For the sort of lasting long-term climate action benefit that I think you're describing, that requires, frankly, an annual inventory along with an annual program, along with the resources to take action on it. So this is veering away, I know, from the broader, or excuse me, the more specific budget conversation. But yeah, for the initial inventory, the value is there in helping us understand how to better plan a new vision for the city.
Thank you. Director Wright, I did have a quick question. What struck me in the testimony tonight is our ability to be prepared, especially when we already have a burn bag into effect and it's May. There was talk tonight of flooding. We've had other issues come up. So really, I'm seeing this connection between land use, our Salem long-term planning, and being prepared for eliminating risk, being able to deal with risk, because those things can have a staff bandwidth or financing costs as well. So given the connection with development, land use, and eliminating this 1 FTE, you were saying that it would take a full 4 FTE to be able to deliver on the specific plan. How much would it take for us to be prepared to deal with upcoming challenges that we know are existing?
So when it comes to preparation and responsiveness, that I think sits in a different category under resiliency, whereas sustainability and climate action as it relates to sustainability is again in another category. I know that the mayor has mentioned a resiliency task force. I'm very unfamiliar with that, but I know that others in the city are working on that, and so I think a number of those ideas and concerns likely fit more in that effort than, say, in a sustainability or climate action component of the sort that at least that I'm talking about here.
And an additional question, if I may. The issue coming up tonight of moving through consultants rather than moving in-house. In work in the community and in talking with neighbors, I know consultants can be seen as a neutral outside force. And also, I'm really intrigued with the local data and the expertise of our staffs with the local environment. What do you see as the trade-off from having someone in-house do this work versus out-of-house?
Well, when we wrote our report last week for the committee to consider, we broke out an option to continue the greenhouse gas inventory with a third party, a consultant, and I think it's a fantastic way to take this very technical, very detailed methodology, use that third party, and continue to get high quality data with very little impact to staff bandwidth. So it's fantastic for very discrete, specific, regular recurring work of that nature that's highly technical. In-house staff, of course, is more expensive. It's a recurring expense that, frankly, we cannot afford in the department today. But that, of course, carries a longer-term relationship as well as in-house expertise. But it's hard for me to really comment on that unless I can really start to weigh deeper into how that program would really look. So there's a benefit there. It's long-term. It's more about engagement. It's more about in-house action and coordination as an organization. The third-party work that could be done, highly technical, very regular, annual, let's say, and there's benefits there for that particular type of work.
Thank you, Director Wright. Member Lewis, followed by Member Anderson.
Okay, I'll ask the question this way. Regardless of how we address the issue of greenhouse gas emissions, whether it be a specific climate action plan, as some have done, or incorporating it under the umbrella of Our Salem, it only makes sense to me that if we're not in a position financially, budgetary, to measure on an annual basis, that those plans become ineffective. At the 2 meetings ago, when you were asked if there were, and I'm going to say this again, the report from the consultants implied at least that they had set this up that could be monitored on an annual basis in-house and relatively simply and inexpensively. But when asked 2 meetings ago if there was money in the budget to do that measuring, we were told no. So my concern is, we're talking about, whether it be under the umbrella of Our Salem or a specific plan, we're talking about doing something that we're not going to be able to measure.
Yeah. So yes, I just want to clarify and just further explain that apparent paradox. Yes, when it comes to the data that's been delivered by the consultant, that data can continue, that data can be managed, but it does require a certain expertise that we lack in-house. And even if we were to somehow not be in this budget situation that compelled the recommended elimination of the long-range planner, that long-range planner does not have that expertise, and more importantly, that long-range planner has been typically designed in our organization to serve many other different functions. There had been a thought of an intern, perhaps, or an intern program. Frankly, that carries even more requirements as far as staff time, just to continually train, recruit, and then again restart the training and recruit every single year to keep that data of a high quality. And so when I answered the question on 2 weeks ago, I suppose, it was to some extent about the money. Certainly, we do not have the money in our budget to do that, but it's also about the staff. We just do not have that expertise in a way that gives me confidence that we can reliably do that moving forward.
Thank you, Director Wright. Member Anderson.
Thank you. Mr. Wright, could you put up the 20 indicators, please?
Yes.
And then the ones that you sort of grade them out that were the 11?
Yeah, sorry. It's a little hard to read.
I would add a 12th one, and that's the one on the bottom of welcoming and livable community, which is infill development and redevelopment. So by my view of that, we've got 12 out of 20, not 11 out of 20. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. You should be a planner.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah.
Then, I joined Councilor Hoy with the long-term planner issue, and could you put up that one where you said, here's our constraints, keep going? Yes, that one. So I look at that and say, I would add a fifth bullet point under workload manageable, and I would say climate action plan.
That's right.
So when I look at all those things, the 5 that are up there, all of which are important, outreach timeframes, new legislation, additional work on hold, climate action plan, that to me really militates toward we need that long-term planner. And the second point about that is, if we were to hire a new long-term planner, I would say that one of the qualifications you would want for that long-term planner is experience with climate action plans. And then you satisfy that, we got no person on the staff to do that. You just make that part of the action, or not the action, the request for proposals, the hiring, whatever you want to call it. Then, how much would you say a long-term planner, what would be the budget cost?
The budget cost, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say it's roughly 170.
Okay, I was going to say 150, but it's in that area. Okay. Now, the way I understand, I mean, this is just my interpretation. It may not be the gloss you wanted to put on it, but it's the gloss that I put on it. It kind of sounds like, well, we're worried that if we get this big climate action plan and we have it all set, we're just going to put it on the shelf and then we won't be able to do anything. So we just won't do anything at all. I mean, we won't even take the first step because we're worried that something might happen down the road. And if that's the case, or something might not happen down the road, if that's the case, every year we could say that. So,
well, if I may,
yeah.
Committee Member Anderson, I think in the staff report that was provided last week, or perhaps earlier, we indicated that these types of issues were going to be brought to council in 2021 upon the completion of our Salem.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, but it actually, Manager Powers, that to me raises another issue that has concerned me all along. We are getting boatloads of information about this. It's all coming too quickly and too fast. And yes, I probably could have read that 2 weeks ago, and I probably did read it 2 weeks ago, but I didn't. You add that on what was there last week, what is there this week, what is there on the other council duties. This process to me as a whole, I feel slightly uncomfortable with the whole budget process because it's too much information, too fast, with not enough time to look at it. Now I want to go back to the consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we approve $50,000 in a consultant. I don't know how we do it, but we direct you to spend $50,000 on a consultant. What could that consultant do for the climate action plan?
Not deliver one. By our best understanding and talking with Portland, Eugene, Corvallis, and other partners who have also done this work elsewhere, a climate action plan will cost at least $120,000.
Okay, so if I didn't expect that a consultant would deliver the plan. I guess my further response to that is, how far along would a consultant move the eventual delivering of a climate action plan?
With a $50,000 investment?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Not very far, I don't think. Really and truly, I want to just explain.
Excuse me, it's going to cost $120,000 what you say, but if we do spend $50,000 of that $120,000 or 40%, it's not going to move it along very much?
So much of this is predicated on how we would design that project, what kind of staff resources we would have available to do what we could not be able to afford without a consultant at the full price. And honestly, genuinely, this sort of work would only then just deliver the plan. So again, I know that this is way deep into climate action as opposed to the budget, but in only delivering that plan, in whatever hybrid approach we could take, it would be of a lower quality. It would also have less of the coordination necessary to then lead to actual action following the delivery of the plan. So I think we could probably do it for $50,000. I really would not like that for the sake of our staff as well as for the quality that everyone needs. And so we would do our level best. We really would. But I don't want to deliver some empty promise here that it would not be of the quality that we would want to deliver.
Thank you, Director Wright. If I may interject, Member Anderson, in researching climate action plans in several different communities, that wasn't always the first step, even though we have done the first step as far as greenhouse gas assessment. I was researching some communities before the climate action plan was started. They had an extreme weather preparation strategy to gauge risks and vulnerabilities. Now, in both what Member Hoy and Member Anderson have talked about, we have a lot of growth and development that's happening. The city and neighbors have spoken that our Salem and long-term planning is an investment that people are willing to stand behind and are willing to make. So I'm thinking, if we're building and connecting people, what are we doing them a disservice if they're then vulnerable to wildfire, flood, if they lose their water supply or their water supply becomes tainted? And I feel the same urgency that Member Hoy and Member Anderson have talked about as far as we've done this step, and I can see we don't want to move further because we are at bandwidth. We don't want to move further on this unless we can follow through. However, we have these options of bringing in a consultant, not eliminating the position, and it still doesn't sound like enough. So I'm kind of wondering how we got here, if I may.
Certainly. And again, when it comes to anything that involves response, potential emergencies, risk management, I would defer to other staff, other departments, and anyone associated with the resiliency effort or resiliency task force. Regarding how we got here, the best that I can do to illustrate is that the approach that we're wanting to take with our Salem is part of, as the city manager mentioned, a long-term effort that we want to take to infuse a data-driven management practice to external outcomes and conditions for the city. So this is the first step in doing so. Future steps would involve, as the report details, the sort of program that I think really highlights and addresses the concerns that you all have mentioned as well as the community. It's just that how we got here is we got here by basically looking ahead at what we can do in the future with what we can do today and knowing what resources we have and basically shifting these timeframes accordingly.
So with this strategic plan, would you be able to do this and not address climate change at all? Would you be able to work on these indicators without using that climate change lens?
No, not at all. I mean, again, these indicators or our report card that is being delivered tonight to the community, much like the strategic plan itself with those 6 icons, includes the natural environment and, as Councilor Anderson counted, 12, I think, indicators that are all distinctly, directly correlated to climate action. So there is truly no way in which we can take any planning action that would not include climate as a major contributor and concern to any solutions we make.
Thank you. And Member Anderson, followed by Member Kaiser.
Okay. It seemed like we're able to do the plan, but your concern is that there would not be the resources for follow-up.
As our budget is currently recommended, we would not have the resources to do the plan.
Okay.
But even if we did have the resources to do the plan, say $50,000 or whatever amount for a consultant as well as staff, we definitely are deeply concerned that we would not have the ability to follow through.
Which is certainly a fair concern. Budgeting is all about setting priorities. And the city council, our elected officials, the city council, the mayor, if the plan was in place, then next year it would ultimately be up to them to decide, is this a high enough priority to fund the implementation? And so not wanting to speak for the council, obviously, ultimately that will be their decision, but doesn't it seem like if they're saying that this is something that they would be interested in seeing if the resources could be found, that maybe in that case the plan would be worth it?
100%. I think I just want to bring this back to the budget concerns, which is that given our structural issues, we are seeking to address those with this recommended budget. I won't speak for the city manager, but that is our first priority, whereas these very important concerns are all the same secondary.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. So my question is if the climate action plan is going to be essentially integrated within our Salem, how are we going to be able to achieve that if what you're saying is we don't have the staff resources in terms of knowledge or skill to do that? And my follow-up question is how would we know what to focus on within our Salem if we don't have a plan that has those goals, those objectives defined in it? So help me understand how we're actually going to arrive at a developed or incorporated or integrated climate action plan within our Salem if we're lacking the talent essentially to do that.
So thank you for the question. This is something I've spoken about vaguely, but it all goes back to Councilor Anderson's questions from our very first committee meeting, where he mentioned the desire, the need, understandably so, for immediate short-term climate actions to go along with what we are looking at, which are the long-term climate actions of the Our Salem process. So when it comes to long-term actions, particularly actions related to greenhouse gas emissions and transportation, we have all the expertise that the city could hope for, whether it be from Public Works and their transportation planners or our planners already on staff. So when it comes to expertise and the long-range actions related to climate and transportation and the comprehensive planning effort that's underway, that expertise is there. So the lack of the expertise goes back to, as I was trying to address in Councilor Hoy's questions, it goes back to the immediate near-term efforts for everything from, say, internal sustainability efforts like figuring out how to improve fuel economy with our fleet, to external climate action efforts that would involve anything from, say, e-waste recycling to tree canopy efforts, those sort of things that are typically associated with a very distinct standalone climate action plan. That's the expertise that we don't have.
Thank you, Member Kaiser. Member Anderson.
Well, I appreciate that, Norm, and I know you're trying to do what we can and the limited constraints we have. But what you just said is the lack of expertise is in the immediate near-term efforts, not the long-term planning. And it's good to know, but that seems to me that's perfect for a consultant. The consultant says, what have other cities done in the immediate near-term efforts? How do they do this? How do they add that? That's, to me, why we ought to have a consultant here. Would that be a correct understanding of what a consultant could do?
It's a fantastic way to begin with an assessment of our current actions, the gaps that are preventing effective improvements, and then targeted solutions to close those gaps. But we still need expertise in-house for monitoring our efforts as we take those actions, as well as committing and coordinating staff to make those actions possible.
And that could potentially happen in a long-range planner, if not the long-range planner herself. It could happen in some of the duties that would be freed up by the long-range planner. And I guess another thing to me that if you could put up the blockages or the whatever you called it something else, some better term than I did. Workload manageable, but.
Yeah.
So additional work on hold. What is that additional work? How would you make some internal evaluation? Is this additional work on hold that we are not doing, is that worth doing before we do a climate action plan? You know, I mean, to me, there's the manageable workload with the little thought you might be able to say, let's prioritize these 5 different problems with manageable workload, the 4 you have there plus the climate action plan, and maybe you could say, we could use our, that position or reorganize our department to manage the workload by keeping the additional work on hold, because that's less important than starting a climate action.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Thank you, Director Wright. I had an additional question as well, Director Wright. We've started this process. We're already in the middle of it. And, well, not in the middle, I guess in the beginning quarter. Would that be a fair assessment? And you'd mentioned we don't want to do this plan and have it sit on a shelf. And I appreciate that. That's a real concern. Which got me thinking, how do we create accountability in this process without funding it? Because certainly having something that's unfunded does not create any accountability in this process. And as was pointed out by this committee and by members here, this was prioritized as something that we did want to move forward with. So what would you have as far as a suggestion to maintain that accountability through this process so that we're not left in that inertia?
And when you refer to process, are you referring to the Our Salem process or to something related to an effort on climate action? Sorry.
Well, I guess it would be both.
Okay.
Because the long-range planning, I think, is definitely tied to our impact with greenhouse gas and with climate change.
Right. So when it comes to accountability with the Our Salem process, one of the fundamental reasons why we have this data-driven approach is, and the model that we have to go along with it, is that even with our existing resources, we can continue to perform this monitoring, perform this reporting to some extent in future years once the actual plan is delivered. So it may not be ideal or optimal for us the way that we'll have to do that, but the accountability is baked in by already committing to these as our main focal points, building a vision around improving those measures where possible, and then reporting those out on a regular basis. So the accountability there is secure even with our current resources. But when it comes to climate action, just to reiterate, and then hopefully leave this as the final thing that I can say on it, without that kind of additional resource and that kind of practice and the staff to support it, we won't have the accountability for that kind of program, that kind of process. Not with the staff that we have, not with the constraints that we have. So that's been our concern all along, is that we just wouldn't be able to continue an effort beyond delivering a plan in that case.
Thank you, Director Wright. Any additional questions? All right, thank you. Moving on to item G. Chief Moore.
Good evening, Chairperson Cook and members of the Budget Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to a couple questions, and I think we're waiting for a slide to appear. I've been asked tonight to discuss two items. The first was something brought up by Chairperson Cook, and that's the service gap in our school resource officer program, and I hope I will address exactly what your question is, and if not, I'm sure you'll let me know. I'll give you a little background first. We have an intergovernmental agreement where we provide police officers to Salem Kaiser schools, and to the best of our knowledge, I think the earliest time we had an officer in a school may have been 1969 when we had an officer assigned to North Salem High School. A little background: the schools pay for 50% of the officer costs, which might include salary, overtime, vehicles, for about 9.5 months of the year or during the school year, and the city picks up the rest of the burden of those officers. So in other words, we pay for 3 months total when they're maybe assigned to do something outside the schools, and the schools and us split the cost during the school year. In 2008 and 2009, we had 14 officers assigned to the school. That included 2 DARE officers. In 2009 and 10, the schools reduced the program by 2 officers, and 2 years later, they reduced it by 3 more officers, which essentially eliminated 3 of the officers that we had assigned to the schools and our 2 DARE officers. And as I indicated last week, I decided to fund 1 of the DARE officers. The officers are currently assigned, and that's what we have now is a sergeant, a corporal, and 7 officers to 5 high schools, 7 middle schools, and we also respond to 28 elementary schools with those 9 officers. I believe when you ask about the service gap, what would be optimum for us if we were able to, we would probably have an officer in each of the high schools and each of the middle schools, and those officers would have to deal with the calls that are associated with the elementary schools. Now, I tell you what we believe would be optimum, but I will tell you the most important factor is that staffing in the schools has always been a decision which the school district makes. They decide how many officers are going to be in the schools, and for instance, when they made the budget cuts, whether we believed with that or not, that was the situation that we were dealt. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think if you talk about the gap, we believe that having an officer in each high school is the best way to go, but splitting 1 officer between 2 middle schools doesn't provide the service that we'd like to provide. Plus, they are responsible for the elementary schools.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Member Hoy.
Thank you. So just to clarify, Chief, the schools are paying for 50% of a police officer's time for 9 months out of the year.
Correct.
They are
Maybe
getting
9.5.
They are getting a heck of a deal.
They're getting a pretty good deal.
Yes, they are.
Member Anderson.
I had a quick question about the elementary schools. You mentioned 20 of them. Does that include public charter schools like the Eagle Charter School?
No, and we will respond to private schools when we're able. Obviously, we're not under contract, but if they were to call complaining about a crime, we would respond to any of those schools as well.
To clarify,
we try and do that with our school officers.
I'm sorry, that is a public charter school.
Well, no, that may not include those numbers then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chief Moore, I had an additional question. As far as the size of the districts in our area and comparable school districts as large, is this true across the state with other districts? Do you have any comparisons for the role with SROs and just the agreement with the districts?
I don't have that with me today, I'm sorry to say.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions? Thank you, Chief Moore.
You bet. I'll go on to the second question. I believe this was by Vice Chairperson Nordyke, and the question was, what does our response time compare to other agencies? And while we did not have that information available, Beaverton had done a study during the 2018 calendar year, which is what you see before you. Now, what this is our response to priority 1 and 2 calls, and I will tell you, not every department would categorize priority 1 and 2 calls exactly the same, but I think we're probably in the same area pretty much. So I think we're close. And what we define our version of priority 1 and 2 call response is incidents where there is an immediate potential or serious threat to a person or public safety that requires an immediate response. In other words, we're going to drop pretty much everything we have to do and try and get to that call as soon as we can. And those types of calls might be armed person, armed robberies, assaults, burglaries in progress, thefts, car thefts in progress, domestics, fights, gunshots, kidnappings, and some of the more serious crimes. But really it entails potentially anything that is in progress or there would be a serious threat. Now, as you see, the chart depicts response times by minutes, populations, officers per 1,000, and total calls for service. That doesn't necessarily mean that it takes us 8 minutes to get to every emergency call. What it means is it varies sometimes. Sometimes, if the officers are clear and they're a block away, we're going to get there in a minute. Sometimes it's going to be longer than that. So these are just averages, and as you can see, our response time is highest amongst the 5 agencies, and our officers per 1,000 is actually
less than any of the other agencies because, as you see at the bottom, Eugene recently hired 10 officers to augment their staffing. So I'll anticipate your next question, and I will try and answer why I think that is the way it is. And I will tell you, basically, Salem's population has increased. Calls for service have increased. Our crime rate has increased. Our unobligated patrol time has decreased. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about our ability to randomly patrol our neighborhoods or be in what we call hotspots where we know there are going to be issues because of our crime analysis and the things we'd like to do. And unobligated patrol time, depending on who you talk to, we believe is very important because it allows us to do those routine things like traffic stops and being in the areas that are important because of some of the analysis we do. But probably most important, I think, in our response time is the fact that we have less officers today than we had 10 years ago. And while you don't hear me, those of you that have been on this council for a long time come in and whine and ask for more officers. I understand our budget situation, and I understand what tough decisions you have to make. I can tell you this probably is not sustainable for a police agency. And I will tell you, while I represent the police department today, I will tell you when I speak for every other department head in the city that will tell you this city is lean, and we have a variety of issues that are very difficult for our department heads and, more important, their staff to deal with. We do the best we can with the resources we have, but I can tell you the operations of this city are just not keeping up. And as you move into the future and are looking at potential revenue, I would certainly hope that you would consider that.
Thank you, Chief Moore. I just had an additional request for some more information. In talking with the SROs, it really, having that extra time to be able to connect with youth and recognizing where problems, you mentioned hotspots as a geographic location.
Mm-hmm.
From my experience in talking with SROs, they can recognize the person hotspots and be able to intervene or be able to, probably intervention's the wrong word, but assist before something becomes a crisis, before something happens and escalates to where a young person might make a decision that has long-term consequences. I'm concerned based on these numbers that we're missing those person hotspots based on the capacity that you're telling us. Do you feel the same way?
I would agree completely, and and as you have, and I'm sure many people in the room, there's many teachers that can tell you that they'll know who's going to be in trouble in the third grade as they move forward, and they're probably usually right. And I think the fact that we don't have the number of officers in our schools, the fact that we don't have our officers in our middle schools, which is a really important time in children's lives. If you listen to the, I'm a member of the board of directors at Family Building Blocks. If you talk about brain development, you're talking about issues with young people where they need intervention. Is not a bad word at all, and they need advice and they need suggestions on how they can do things. There are a lot of children in our school system that have a lot of things stacked against them. They have many, many different those indicators that there's going to be problems in their lives, and I think the counselors and the teachers are critically important to that. But I think our school officers play an incredible role in that as well, because they can certainly identify and try and help those kids as well.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Member Anderson.
Thank you. Following up on what, I don't know what you are, Sally Cook said, Chair of the Budget. Chief Niblock and I yesterday were at the school district's turnaround lunch. It was called something else, and we saw examples of that where the intervention is helpful. And these were all teachers and counselors and coaches, but I'm sure the police officers perform the same function. So I guess that segues into two things I was going to say. One, thank you for everything that you and your department do on a lean budget and lean staff. And I also appreciate and agree with your comments about you're speaking for the rest of the department heads. Having said that, I do have a question about that. And being a former criminal defense lawyer who at some point has had clients who are in the various institutions, correction institutions around here, and then who got out, and also had clients who had friends and acquaintances and partners who came to Salem. Do you see any correlation between the criminal activity and the response time and the fact that we do have, I don't know, 3 or 4 state prisons here in the city?
I've been asked that probably my entire career. There's a send them home bill that, or the law that if you come from a county, you'll go back home. I don't know how well that works. Councilor Hoy's been in corrections longer. He may be able to answer that. I think it certainly has. I think it certainly has an impact. I think friends and family move closer to the prisons. I think over the years we've seen that. I don't think there's any doubt that I think at one point we had 5 prisons in Salem. And this is just my personal opinion. I probably couldn't prove it if you asked me to, but I think it has certainly has an impact. I think the other things that you have to remember is while we talk about the opioid crisis and things, meth and heroin and other drugs continue to be the scourge of this city. There is no doubt about it. The jail is full. There's no room at the inn. And so I think we have predatory offenders, and I don't mean actually sexual offenders, but I mean when they're not in jail, they're preying on this community. And I think those are the factors that impact us.
This has nothing to do with the budget process, and I see city manager is busy right now, but I know somebody will take this down. I know we have all sorts of issues with the state who we do a lot of services for, and we don't get any tax payments from them. I think this is another item that at some point in the future ought to be discussed with them, that it's the fact that the state prisons are here are ending up more than anecdotally causing problems with our safe and welcoming community that aren't there in the other cities that we're looking at.
Thank you.
Member Lewis.
Thanks, Chief. I have 2 quick questions. One, and I'm just curious, and it's Beaverton, we should thanks for the graph. What is the industry standard for officers per 1,000?
I think it depends on what part of the country you're in.
I'm talking about not necessarily Oregon, but the Northwest.
I don't know if there's actually a standard. I think Portland might have been at 1.5. Many years ago, before I was the chief, the standard in Salem that we were trying to achieve was 1.5. I think it would probably we'd probably have to add 60 officers to get to 1.5. So I haven't doing the math here in my head. I think many agencies are a little higher than what you see there. But I think it's I think 1.2, 1.5, or 1.25 would be a realistic average for I think what's going on in Oregon today.
And my other question is, and I recognize you don't do crystal balls, but I'm going to ask you to anyway. Looking back the last couple of years, looking forward the next 2, are we going to be in better shape or worse shape when it comes to the criminal activity in Salem?
We're going to be in worse shape if we don't make some changes.
Member Parker.
Thank you, Chair Cook. Chief Myers, I have a question. We're obviously way behind the number of officers that we need. Could you address how long, if we gave you the money on July 1st to hire 60 new officers, could you address how long it would take for those officers actually to be out on the streets, up and running, protecting our community? Thank you.
You bet. Well, 60 officers would take an awful long time because we'd have to have trainers for all of those officers, so that's pretty unrealistic. At one point earlier, I think it was this year or last year, we had 21 officers in the police academy at one time, which was unprecedented for us. We usually have 2 or 3 or 4, but we were so far behind, we had 21 officers. And it probably took us 3 years to go from where we were down 20, 25 officers to recover. I will just tell you, if we hire an officer that has never done this work, it takes us about a year to train them. If we are fortunate to hire a lateral officer, we can probably have them on the streets in 5 months or so.
Thank you. Chief Moore, just one additional question. With the IGA, with school districts in our area, is that negotiated department to district, or how does that work? Because I concur with Member Hoy. What a steal, 50% of the employment costs 9.5 months out of the year, and at the same time recognize school districts are seeing the same budgetary issues that we are.
Right. It's negotiated department to Salem Kaiser, and then it's brought to the City Council for approval.
And for the drop in, you said there was a drop in 2008, or excuse me, 2008, 2009, an additional drop in 2010, an additional drop in 2012?
2008, 2009, I think they dropped 2, and then 2010, 11, they dropped 3 additional.
And was that?
It was Salem Kaiser budget issues, and they decided that they needed to cut back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on then.
Thank you.
Closing item G. Thank you, Chief Moore. There are no public hearings this evening, so we're going to move on to item 7.
Excuse me, Chair Cook. I
yes.
did have a question on some of the other information items. Specifically, I'm interested in the short-term rentals. If I could have somebody from staff to respond to that.
On item B, is that correct?
Yes, 5B. I think that,
Budget
There's
Officer
movement over on
Jacobs?
this side of the room.
something's happening. I guess here's my question. There's 10% that is not Airbnb, HomeWay, and VBRO. Will we ever have a way of finding those 10%?
Tony Turley, Financial Reporting Manager for the city. We do try and identify them, and we do try and work with them to come into compliance with the code, but not all of those are local or U.S. companies, so we're continually monitoring what's the activity that's happening there and try and bring them into compliance.
And are you sure about it's more than 90% as opposed to some figure that's less than that, or where do you get that 90% figure?
That was research that I did on the available, or at least the listings for short-term rentals in the Salem area.
So you're going online and posing as somebody who wants to rent a place in Salem. Okay, got it.
I looked at the companies that were currently listing, and those 3 companies comprised substantially more than 90% of those that were being listed for rent within the city of Salem limits that I could find. I couldn't get exact because it's all map driven, and without having a license, you don't get to see all of the information.
And so my last question is, how do you know how do you have to make sure that the platforms we discussed are actually reporting and remitting the occupancy? I mean, how do we know that they may say they're operating at 60% and they're really operating at 80% in terms of nights in use?
Every listing that they have on their platform has transient occupancy tax listed as a cost for staying on their platform. It's not we assign it to some and we don't assign it to others. It is a permanent fixture on their platform that transient occupancy tax is part of the cost of booking.
How can we be sure that that transient occupancy tax that they are charging to the people who rent get back to the city?
We have the returns, and we have audit files, electronic audit file that came from those platforms that we have
Great,
reviewed.
great. So in other words, you have some access to their information, so you actually know that they're at 80% rather than 60% and shortchanging us to 20. Okay, thank you. Good job.
All right, any additional questions? Perfect. Moving on to special orders of business. City Manager Powers, I understand you'd like to wait. Perfect. So next, Budget Officer Kelly Jacobs will present the overview of the final result area, good governance. Following her presentation, there will be an opportunity for the Budget Committee to ask questions of staff and discuss the result area. Following discussion, Kelly will guide the committee through agenda items 7C and 7F.
Thank you very much, Chair Cook. So the good governance result area includes the departments and activities supporting the public-facing programs provided by the city. Those programs reviewed over the past 2 committee meetings. Good governance has an expenditure appropriation of $110.9 million, representing 26.97% of the total city service area budgets. The result area begins on page 43 of the budget publication. The result area of good governance describes an enterprise that is managed to be fiscally sustainable, provide quality services, proactively engage residents, be forward-thinking, and build capacity and partnerships to prepare for the future. The City of Salem endeavors to achieve this result by ensuring stewardship and sustainability of the city's financial, human, information, and physical assets, clearly communicating responsive, accurate, and accessible information and services, strengthening community and regional partnerships, providing assurance of regulatory compliance to minimize and mitigate risk, and maintaining transparent, ethical, inclusive, and accountable leadership and collaboration. This very full slide breaks down the $110.9 million of the good governance expenditure budget among the programs and centralized services that offer administrative, financial, purchasing, legal, information technology, fleet, human resources, facilities operation and maintenance, risk management, and health benefit services to the dozens of programs that directly impact the residents of Salem. The good governance result area includes 188.50 full-time equivalent positions, and the budget proposal incorporates the following position changes. The repurposing of the deputy city manager position to a chief financial officer. Elimination of the budget officer position. Very unique thing to be saying. Elimination of 2.0 full-time equivalent positions in the information technology department, a business analyst and a network analyst, and an elimination of a full-time staff assistant position in the legal department. And again, I'm focusing on cranes, and this provides some relevance for my 3-year-old grandson with my job, that I can have pictures of cranes. The good governance result area includes programs across multiple city funds, including the general fund, city services fund, equipment replacement reserve fund, 2 self-insurance funds, 2 trust funds, and a community-facing fund, and a few community-facing funds with programs included in this result area due to their alliance with the definitions of good governance. The new Department of Budget, Finance, and Purchasing will be guided by the new Chief Financial Officer. The City Manager's Office, the administrative hub for the city, is also in this result area. Employee Services is comprised of facilities and fleet services, self-insurance programs for health, workers' compensation, and liability insurance. Employee Relations, Recruitment, Records Management, Policy Development, and Contract Negotiations for 5 collective bargaining groups. Good governance also includes the portion of the equipment replacement reserve dedicated to the replacement of the city's vehicles. A detailed list of vehicles proposed for replacement appears in the budget document beginning on page 268. Each city department with a vehicle inventory has a unique cost center in the reserve, or cost centers, depending on the number of funding sources. Departments allocate funding each year to either facilitate pay-as-you-go replacement or to feed the reserve to accrue funding for a planned future replacement. Information technology, document services, and network connectivity, telecom, provides the city's technology infrastructure with development, maintenance, and security of network equipment and applications, as well as on-demand copy, print production, graphic design, imaging and archiving, mail messenger services, operation and maintenance of the city's telecommunications system, and expansion of the connectivity infrastructure. The programs for the legal department represent the consultation and representation required by the city for the purpose of creating ordinances, administrative rules, real estate documents, contracts, and agreements. The department also represents the city in litigation and offers records management and election official services by the city recorder. Good governance is the home for the mayor and council budget, which includes funding for the annual financial audit process and the hearings officer. The non-departmental appropriation in good governance includes costs with a citywide benefit, as well as the general fund's $3 million contingency. The good governance service area includes the debt service for the city's pension obligation bond, the cost of which is allocated to each city department or fund with employees. Trust is primarily an appropriated contingency of $500,000 that can be accessed for any of the city's trust cost centers to address an unanticipated expenditure requirement during the course of the fiscal year. And finally, several community-facing departments opted to designate 16 programs out of more than 250 as being aligned with the result area of good governance. I have kept the presentation for this result area brief because of the demands on the committee to complete its work this evening. The length of the presentation is in no way indicative of the scope of the services supported in this result area or the essential nature of those services. As I noted in the first result area review 2 weeks ago, the At Your Service pages at the back of the Good Governance section provide a unique perspective of the breadth and variety of work product delivered each day by coworkers in departments that we define as support services. That concludes my presentation of the Good Governance result area budget. Department representatives are available to respond to your questions.
Wonderful. And before moving on, Budget Officer Jacobs, I would like to go ahead and call a brief break for us. Do I need a motion? Okay. I'd like to go ahead and do a 10-minute break. Go and enjoy yourself and take a walk, get some water. Thank you. Coming back refreshed and ready, I am now calling to order again the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for May 8th. Thank you for your patience. Could I have Budget Officer Jacobs return to the podium to help the committee navigate items 7C through 7F? Thank you, Budget Officer Jacobs.
You're very welcome, Chair Cook. So before we go on to the next items on the agenda, I just wanted to ensure if there were any questions from the committee in regard to the Good Governance result area.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. Let's first talk about, and I think this will probably be for Facilities Manager Hanson, pages 52 and 53. And while you're walking up mine, I'm just curious as to the differences between, I mean, I can see some of them, they're obvious, but I see 3 items on the bottom of 52, building maintenance, building operating systems maintenance, building services, and then I also look at third item on 53, which is custodial services. And I can understand how custodial services are a little different, but building maintenance and building services, how do they overlap with custodial services? Because we're looking at 15, about 22 employees.
Minnie Hansen, Employee Services Director. With regard to your question, so custodial is just what it seems. It's the people who do custodial services. Building maintenance is a group of employees that go around and do what I would vernacularly call break fix. Something's not working, something needs to be moved. That's what they do. And then there's another group of individuals who do more technical work. They do our HVAC maintenance, they do mechanical maintenance, so they're a little more skilled, and they do a different kind of maintenance. So between the two.
And then the building services.
I'm going to look at Budget Officer Jacobs a second. So the building services is the more of the direct contact with our employees. These are the individuals who then support an employee calls, they need an ergonomic adjustment.
Got it.
So they do direct employee contact.
Thank you. May I continue? I have a question or two.
Please.
Thank you. Now on page 56, and I'm not sure who answered this. It's Employee Services Department, Equipment Replacement Reserve, Summary of Services and Programs. It's page 56. Are you the person?
I can be the person.
Okay, perfect. I'm looking at this and saying that's $10 million, Equipment Replacement Reserve, breaking down to $3+ million on that, and fleet, $7.5 million.
Can I explain this?
That was going to be my question.
That's great, because I'm so proud of this, I can't even tell you. So,
I bet you'll be able to tell me.
so the Equipment Replacement Reserve, that $3.3 million, that is the actual planned replacement for next fiscal year. For vehicles, thank you, Josh, for vehicles, the planned replacement for vehicles next fiscal year. The balance here, the $7.6 million, is an appropriated reserve. It's what we have because we do long-range forecasting for vehicle replacement. We do 10, 15-year forecasts for vehicle replacement. So this is money that is held in reserve so that we can afford to do vehicle replacement into the future. Some departments do a pay-as-you-go model, and they pay into the reserve each year a sufficient amount for the replacement. Others pay into the reserve a set amount that in 1 year may not be enough to pay for their entire replacement, so they can draw from their reserve to be able to do that. And we forecast so that we can keep that reserve at a certain level throughout the forecast period. It's good management.
Well, I didn't doubt that. My next question is this $10 million, almost $11 million, is that from the general fund, or is it, where is it?
Some of it is from the general fund. The biggest vehicle users, I guess you would say, in the general fund would be police and parks.
Okay.
But a lot of this is transportation services fund. It's the utility fund. So this reserve is a fund that is managed on behalf of all city departments.
So I guess I'll get to where I think I'm leading in this. It is theoretically possible to somebody.
Pay no attention to
Is
the
there an
sound
echo
coming
here?
from the galley.
Pay no attention to the man behind the
Totally
Okay.
fine.
Is that Assistant Public Works Director Chandler's phone? Or is it the man whose face is turning red? I guess what I would like to go is that there is a possibility to say, instead of X dollars that comes from the general fund that is put into this reserve, we could say we want 95% of X in that, and then use the 5% of X as a potential source of funding for some of these other programs that we're talking about. And I understand what you're going to tell me is reserves are important, we need to do that, and we should do that. But is that theoretically possible for the council and the budget committee to do?
There are most things that are theoretically possible to do, but I would not advise you to do it.
Yeah.
It would be against my advice to do that. I will tell you that we are under-reserved as an example for police vehicles. The reserve actually, with the police department contributing a substantial amount each fiscal year in their operating budget, the reserve still is in trouble by about the 6th year. So remember I said we do long-term forecasting,
Yeah, I
so a
understand.
10, 15-year forecast by the 6th year, the police reserve is in trouble, even with a substantial contribution from their operating budget each year.
Well, I presume you would tell me that there are no reserves that are over-reserved.
I think that's a pretty safe bet, Counselor.
Okay. Then 62. Non-departmental summary of services and programs. I'm looking at the non-departmental program, and the entire general fund money is in that non-department programs is $5,330,000, of which 60% almost is reserves. Why is the reserve, or the contingencies, why do we have a 60% contingency if we think it's going to be that high? why isn't it put in any of these other areas?
A contingency is a particular expenditure category that in the case of a situation that is not anticipated as part of budget development, if we need to return to the council during the course of the fiscal year and ask for an additional appropriation, we would do that from contingency. We have contingency at $3 million, and it depends on the year. I think a year or two ago, we spent $1.9 million of contingency appropriation.
So the contingency is not really related directly to the non-departmental programs that are listed out here.
It is a separate thing as
Okay.
it is listed separately.
Okay, got it. So it's not contingency for cable television, unemployment.
It is for the
paid-
entire general fund.
Okay, so I presume you'll tell me theoretically we could take some money from that too, but you would not advise it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I would agree with that.
Wonderful. Budget Officer Jacobs, have you taken us through items 7C through 7F?
I haven't yet, but I'm happy to do that.
Perfect.
So you need to bear with me here just a little bit, because now we get to sort of the meat of your job as a budget committee. And I think early in your tenure, I described to you that you need to approve the property tax levies, and you need to make a budget recommendation to City Council. That's 2 of the 4 things that the Budget Committee is charged with doing. And so the item 7C this evening is the ad valorem property taxes for the Salem Urban Renewal Agency. I've listed purposely the Salem Urban Renewal Agency first. The first 2 items, 7C and 7D, are relevant to the Urban Renewal Agency because I think that we can get through those relatively quickly. So let's have a couple of successes under our belts and get through these rather quickly.
Motion to approve the ad valorem property taxes.
Thank you, Vice Chair Nordike. Thank you, Member Nanki. I have a motion from Member Nordike and a second from Member Nanki. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the Salem Urban Renewal Agency's ad valorem property taxes, please say aye. Aye. Motion approved.
Same is true for item 7D. This is the budget for the Urban Renewal Agency.
I move approval of item 7D.
I have a motion from Member Hoy. Do I have a second? A second from Member Kaiser. Thank you. Is there any discussion of the motion? Right. All those in favor of approving the Salem Urban Renewal Agency's fiscal year 2020 budget, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes.
Moving on to item 7E, this is the City of Salem ad valorem taxes. With this approval, you will approve our permanent tax rate. We levy at the maximum, and then you will also approve the bond levy rate, our general obligation bond levy rate.
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Member Nordike, seconded by Member Nanki. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, may all those in favor of approving this motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion passes.
Thank you. And moving on to item 7F. This is the recommendation of the City of Salem budget. And as you will note on your agendas, and the slide that's up being displayed right now, we're doing this approval in the order of result areas, alphabetical order of result areas. And so your agenda, so that you don't have to look necessarily in the section of your budget notebook for good governance, the agenda includes the budget amount, and it also includes position changes or other changes that are notable in the result area budget. And so as a committee, there have been no motions to in any way amend the city manager's budget at this point. So this is the point of the agenda where if you want to have discussion about the budget proposal and make any changes to the budget proposal, we are proposing that you do that by result area. And the first result area is good governance.
Member Anderson.
I've got motions I want to make, but I have no idea under what area they come.
I'm happy to help you with that.
Okay. Here's my first motion. I move that we dedicate $50,000 of general fund monies toward continued work on the climate action plan.
And if I could, and I know
Yes,
you've just made a motion, but that is an item that would be best discussed during the welcoming and livable community result area.
Okay, perfect, I'll make that. Then,
Give me your next one and I'll try to direct you.
okay. I am interested in reducing the, no, I guess I would say, I would propose that, and I'm not making a motion because I may not be there, but I would, based on the fact that last year's budget, we had contingencies of $3 million and we ended up using $1.9 million. I will move at the appropriate time that our contingencies be $2,500,000, and that will free up money to use for some other programs that we've been talking about.
So that would be actually appropriate for the current result area.
Okay, so I move that the contingency found on page 62 of the budget be reduced from $3 million to $2,500,000.
I second.
So we have a motion from Counselor Anderson with a second from Counselor Hoy, is that right? No. Who was the second? A second. So the Andersons have made a proposal.
Boys.
All right, so do we have discussion on this motion?
Yeah, I think I already spoke to it, so I waive my right to discuss right now.
Okay. Member Hoy, followed by Member Nanki.
I'd like to defer to Member Nanki first.
Member Nanki.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Contingency, if it's not used, rolls over to next year's contingency, so we will be taking that away permanently.
If I could, the contingency appropriation is only as good as the amount of resources that we have to support it. So it's budget appropriation authority. And right now, to balance this budget in the general fund, we are using $4 million of working capital to balance the budget in the general fund this year.
Correct.
And that's assuming expenditure savings next year, and it's assuming that we do not spend $2.5 million of the contingency. So with those assumptions, we're still eating up $4 million of working capital with this 2020 budget.
Correct.
So I think, if I may, another way of answering your question, Committee Member Nanki, is that rather than going into the contingency fund next year, it would just be a reduction in the working capital.
Correct. It would take it away from working capital because it would not be necessarily unexpended.
Member Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In contemplating this budget process for tonight, I've been thinking how we could, I know I have some things I would like to fund, and I had come up in my mind with some ways to pay for those items. I had a brief chat with the city manager earlier this evening between meetings, and he suggested that my idea maybe wouldn't be his idea. But not surprising, I'm sure, to most of you. But so I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a better process for us to identify priorities that we would like to fund that he didn't fund and leave the how to do it up to the city manager.
Thank you. Member Hoy, I thank you for that comment. And I just want to say, sitting through this process for a second time, what really strikes me is we, as a budget committee, are not able to say, let's increase revenue. Let's look at having some stability for these programs because they're very important. So I'm very interested in making sure that as we move forward, once budget adjourns, we're able to bring forward that message to the community that these are important programs. And as Budget Officer Jacobs spoke to, having to dip into working capital for programs that the community deems important is not necessarily aligned with what we're trying to accomplish. So thank you. Member Anderson.
Well, what you just said, Chair Cook, really kind of relates to what Member Tigan said to us. I mean, we need new revenue, and it's hard to approve a budget with all the issues that we're facing and every one of these programs that we've been talking about, both city managers' recommendations and what we on the committees have been talking about. They're all vital things. And it's hard to make the cuts if we don't have the revenue, and you know, they're parallel tracks right now, the budgeting process and where we're going to have revenue. And yes, the parallel lines will meet at infinity, but it's much better to have those lines meet at some closer in time. Then, with respect to, I understand now, I didn't understand before, maybe I don't fully understand about the reduction of 500,000. But this is a problem we see every year, that we come in and we say to the city staff, here are the programs that are important to us that we would like to add back into the budget. And we always leave it up, you know, probably appropriate, so we leave it up to the staff to say, here's how we're going to make the cuts. But that just kind of leaves the question that the staff may come back saying, we're making the cuts out of program A, B, and C, where we don't like those cuts either. We'd rather have you cut it out of programs X, Y, and Z. So this was an attempt to say, here is some money that, that could be freed up. And I understand that it's going to decrease the working capital, and I saw that chart. It's not a good-looking chart to look at it. And, you know, I guess I might be satisfied if we make these various motions that we'll be putting back in, you know, some pretty substantial, I would say at least $250,000 when you look at the 50,000, if somebody moves the long-term planner and then the youth programs. I am not sure, I would guess that the staff would not come back and say, we're going to make this up by taking out of our working capital, which is this here. They're going to come back and say, we're going to cut some other programs. And, you know, and I can see why they wouldn't, because your job is to be fiscally prudent and make sure that you know, we don't go over the cliff. So it's close to an intractable problem. And I'm just trying to throw something out there. But my guess is, if either I withdraw this motion or it fails to pass, we're not going to see the city manager come back and say, let's take this extra money that we don't have out of the working capital.
If I may, I think if that approach proceeds, you know, certainly whether it's $250,000, 500,000, 176,000 will impact my recommendation. As Budget Officer Jacob said earlier, my proposed budget uses $4 million of working capital to fund recurring services. That's down $3.2 million from what we would have used based upon the forecast. Another 100,000, 150,000, given the Budget Committee's discussion, given what you've heard, what I've heard from the community, working capital might be what I come back with to council or to the Budget Committee next week, and that's another, I guess, question for consideration.
I think you answered my question is we're going to have to meet another week to hear your recommendations, I would guess.
Thank you, Member Anderson.
Or if I may, or have it come to council.
Member Moore Green, thank you for your patience, followed by Member Kaiser.
Thank you, Chair Cook. I do think that it is appropriate to have a discussion about the recommendations from the Sustainable Revenue Task Force among us, either tonight or next week. The idea of continuing to use working capital on programs it is not sustainable, nor is it wise, and cutting into contingency is not a wise budget decision either. And I think that discussions should center around what the council thinks that they are going to do with those recommendations, because if memory serves me, and I might be off here, to have any one of those recommendations come to fruition in a positive sense is 2 years. It's 2 years. I'm sorry. The discussion needs to be made. I feel that the discussion needs to be had, especially after Member Teagan brought it to all of our attention earlier this week, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Moore Green. Member Kaiser, followed by Member Nanki.
Thank you. It was just kind of a comment, is I think we're going to need another meeting of this committee, because I think we're going to run out of time. I would love to have a conversation about the revenue task force. I'd love to have a conversation about how the city manager plans to take the things that we prioritize as a committee and fit them in, so to speak, and to see that come back. I don't think that's something that we want to do on the fly and then approve it. So I would entertain meeting again one more time so that we can continue the deliberations without going through, 2 hours of other things before we get there.
Just a reminder, I believe we still have a motion on the floor. Am I looking for some?
With the permission of the second, I'll withdraw that motion. I think we've got a good discussion going here, and that's what I wanted to do. We got to start looking at what programs are important to us.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Nanki.
Oh, has the motion been withdrawn? I don't know. Is the city attorney? Okay, I didn't know who the second was.
That's okay. Am I supposed to? Motion withdrawn.
Okay.
There you go, hammer down. Well, I suppose the other question that then comes in is, for the manager's recommended budget for next year, will
Fiscal
it
year.
include additional cuts to the departments that we are trying to add funds back into, and will there be a continuing pressure on those same programs again that then will be increased because we took some of the money and threw it back in for this year?
If I may respond to a question, a statement that was made earlier, if council agrees with the recommendations of the Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force in that any revenue measure be referred to the voters, and assuming that would be at a November election, a special election would not provide hardly any time for any public information. So assuming November general election, and then assuming an aggressive and simple implementation of an operating fee, for example, revenues could be in place for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, a year from now, July 1st of 2020, fiscal year 2021. That would certainly have a significant influence on my proposed budget for fiscal year 2021. I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid. So certainly actions taken on this year's budget would influence the recommendation for fiscal year 2021. However, as has been shared with the Budget Committee, this proposed budget was a work product of the department directors. We use criteria that would not change going forward. Population served, reliance on the city to provide that service, is demand increasing, decreasing, staying the same. So those same criteria we would use. Again, I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid. So certainly if there were programs that were restored this year, if there was direction from council, thou shall prepare a climate action plan, that would be taken into consideration for the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget.
Thank you, City Manager Powers. I had a question for Budget Officer Jacobs quickly. I know that this is the priority-based budget that we're working off of, and this is
our result areas that we're working from, the city's result areas.
And we have the priority-based budget, because I remember coming forward with, these are our priorities, and then whoops, they're not funded. And in layman's terms, previously, the priority-based budget was meant to align those two. So as Councilor McCoy would say, we are purchasing the ingredients, we're deciding what to make, and then we're making the meal. How is this changed from, how is this priority-based budget reflected in these service areas?
Sure. I think that the things that the city manager mentioned to you in regard to sort of the criteria that the department heads applied to the programs that were discussed as possible reductions, those are criteria that are within the basic program attributes for priority-based budgeting. So it was taken from priority-based budgeting to be able to have kind of like that framework to have the discussion about reliance in the community, the population that's served, the demand for the service, and so on.
So then, building on that with the point that Chief Moore had made, that services are very lean as far as departments and staffing are concerned, and building on what Member Moore Green had said, this really isn't a question of reprioritizing. This is really a question of revenue and diversity and breadth of revenue. Is that discussion appropriate for the Budget Committee to entertain on the floor, or could you explain some more about that?
Sure. I think that it is absolutely appropriate for the Budget Committee to have a conversation about revenue. In the amount of time that we have remaining at this meeting or potentially a next meeting, I don't know how much. I don't know if we would be able to go into the same level of depth in that discussion that we have been able to have with the Revenue Task Force, as an example. But I think it is appropriate, definitely, for this body as advisory to council to advise council to pursue additional revenue sources for the general fund.
So would I be able to ask for a motion to that effect?
You're the chair.
Do I have a motion on the floor to recommend to council to pursue some of the Sustainable Revenue Task Force recommendations after budget? Member Lewis?
Yeah, it's my understanding we've already forwarded that to the city council.
That correct? Okay. And can we have an additional recommendation, because this is not only council ourselves, but also members of the public, to be able to show that members of the public also are concerned, because I consider them to be our champions in the community, to be able to explain where budget falls, especially since it's been discussed in these meetings. It can be quite obtuse if you're not looking at it every day. Member Anderson?
So moved.
I have a motion from Member Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Member, I'm going to pronounce your last name wrong, from Member Roz. Oh, from Member Barker. Well, I really did it wrong that time. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Discussion, Member Nanki.
So does this include all three of the same recommendations that came out of the work session the other day? And do any of the members of the Budget Committee know what those three things are that we're potentially going to recommend council look at?
I think the way I proposed the motion was that we take action, that it not just be, that we show support. So I would be happy for an amendment if someone would like to amend from budget. Member Sund.
Well, that was a question of mine as well, and I'm looking at I'm not texting here, I'm looking at the PowerPoint from the Revenue Task Force, and I apologize I wasn't at those meetings, but I have read through these, and I was unclear about all of them. The city operating fee made sense to me, pretty straightforward. The payroll tax, was that a payroll tax on it that an individual employee would pay or the employer would pay?
So there were three recommendations,
Right.
two of which that were recommended by City Manager Powers. Manager Powers, would you like to
So I
explain?
think
or-
starting there, and then that becomes part of the motion, because it would be good to know what, if we're going to vote on that, there's at least make a motion and approve it, what it is exactly, and the cost. The other question, just while I got the microphone, overall, if it's 2 or 3, whatever it is, what do we think the burden on an individual in Salem is going to be if those were approved by the voters? So the payroll, the household tax, the city operating fee makes sense, other than it kind of gets diluted with the apartments and the commercial buildings. But if we were to say per person, this is what we're asking the city to kind of step forward and say, we need to fund the police. I mean, I have great concerns listening to the police chief tonight, for sure. I don't have as great concerns about climate change, but that's just me. But I do have great concerns about the safety of our community, the schools, in the world that we live in. So that would be the messaging then, if we're going to say, hey, we're going to step up and everybody's going to pitch in $20 a month or whatever it is, some sort of a messaging. And what's the plan for the messaging? And, are they all going to go to the voters? I guess that's where I have a lot of questions about, that. If we're going to approve recommending it, what are we on the hook for?
Well, yes.
I don't think this committee has the information to make a decision on the motion on the floor.
Right.
And I don't think that's an appropriate spot to put them into. When people haven't been there, they don't have the materials. We can't go into a full depth conversation about right now. So I would I would encourage the motion and the seconder to withdraw their motion.
Would Member Anderson?
If I can add really quick too, I don't think that means we can't discuss it, but I think we need to discuss it in general terms. I would be really curious to know from the committee members what their concerns are, if they think we're on the right track for the priorities of this budget, what some ideas are for what we could do. I'm really interested to hear what Member Moore Green has to say, since she was on that task force. But at this point, I really feel the motion needs to be withdrawn.
I'm happy to withdraw the motion, Member Kaiser. My concern is I want to make sure.
You draw somebody else's motion?
Oh.
The maker has to do it.
Sorry, Maker, motion.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, as far as the motion, my understanding is that that was to encourage that it be put up for a vote for the people of Salem to decide.
Oh, no, we can't make that decision.
No, that it was referred to the city council, that they are recommended to turn it over to a vote in November. So with the understanding that is not the case, that it would not be a vote of the people, then I withdraw the motion.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Lewis.
Yeah, I recall the motion. It moved forward looking at all three options, but there was no specificity, there was no choice, there was no specifics to it. And so that's as far as it's gone up to this point.
Member Moore Green.
If I might suggest, following Member Kaiser's comments, that the members of the Budget Committee, because the counselors have all received the Sustainable Revenue Task Force report, receive a copy of that. And I'm sure there's a cheat sheet to it also. And it addresses all of the questions that you had, Member Sun. I mean, we drilled down to what the households would be, whether or not you lived in an apartment or you were residential or you were a company of 500. And allow them to review that information and come back next week and have that discussion, because I'm with City Manager Powers that if it's council is going to indicate that they are going to move forward with something, then it does make what we're attempting to do easier. So that would be my thought at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Moore Green. Member Anderson.
Thank you. I agree with Member Moore Green. And what I am hearing from this is that the Budget Committee as a whole, which includes the city councilors, would like the council to take a hard look at what additional revenues we can achieve in the city. And we've already been doing that, but I think our consensus is the consensus of this group is we need to continue. And I will tell you that at the last meeting, I was not there for the vote, but the meeting with the Revenue Task Force, but my understanding was the Revenue Task Force said they would forward the report to the City Council for action without saying, we like all three proposals or one of the proposals or two of the proposals. The other thing, I guess that this is for the city manager, not all of those proposals, I know the task force recommendation was submitted to the voters, but legally of the three, I think, I know that not all of them, and so if you could just let us know which are the ones that need to be referred to the voters, which are the ones that don't need to be referred to the voters.
At the work session, City Council work session with members of the Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force, council members asked that three revenue ideas, three revenue options be brought forward to City Council. Those three are a operating fee, an employee paid payroll tax, and a local option gas tax. Of those three, the local option gas tax must be referred to voters.
So back to when you were saying if they were referred to voters and passed in November, we could be ready for the next fiscal year. What would happen if the two that didn't need to be referred to the voters were instead passed by the council? When would those come into effect?
If the Budget Committee wishes to continue this discussion next week, we can certainly have a very precise answer to that question, Committee Member Anderson. Also, Council is scheduled to consider the recommendation from itself from the prior work session at an upcoming work session on June 17th. And certainly we would have a very detailed, here is an implementation plan under different scenarios, voter referral as recommended by the task force if it were initiated by council. So we would have that information. Part of my hesitancy to answer this evening is there are some implementation issues that are going to be of interest to council based upon council's discussion of some of the equity and some of the allocation between multifamily and that needs that needs additional detail for council to be fully informed. I don't want to wing that this evening.
No, I agree you shouldn't. That's why I think we need a second session, going back to my, or a fourth session, going back to my earlier comments, that there's a lot coming at us and we don't want to do it on the fly. And I don't expect at the next meeting you will have the detail that you would give us, the council itself, on the 17th of June, but I expect just some general stuff, so because I think the reason we have the budget committee is to get some citizen input that just doesn't make us isolated as a council here. So I would welcome at least a 20,000 foot level discussion from you folks on the budget committee, and Member Moore Green already knows things about that, so I'm sure she will be a good asset to hear.
Wonderful. So if I can bring us, Member Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'd just like to throw out how I would like to proceed and get other members' feedback. I feel comfortable now voting to approve, I mean, not like right this instant, but I'm comfortable with the manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 2020. I would prefer not to slice and dice it, to pull out funds to try to fund some other priorities that council obviously feels strong about. And I say that because I am pretty optimistic, and I do support council's looking at new revenue sources, but I kind of doubt they're going to be ready for fiscal year 2020 budget. But I'm optimistic, you know, and pleased to see at least council's interest in that, because this is the first time since 1990 that a council has even been willing to look at additional revenues. And, you know, because the way our property taxes have worked since 1990, you know, we're obviously being squeezed, and things have been giving way over the years. And that's, I'm sure it's very frustrating for the Climate Action Plan folks to see one more year of inaction, but this isn't a typical year of kicking the can down the road, because we have right on the horizon possibly 3 new revenue sources. So because of that, and because the council and budget committee would be more likely to be able to fund our priorities, possibly even some of the programs that I'm prepared to vote to cut for this year, you know, it's not, next year will look better than this year, I think, so I'm willing to go ahead and make some of these hard choices as outlined in the city manager's recommended budget. I'm just wondering how others feel about that.
Thank you. Member Sund.
While I don't think that obviously the revenue sources should inform this budget because there's not enough time, I do believe that the revenue, given the state of affairs in Oregon, I mean, we have to look sort of, you know, not just at Salem, but other headwinds coming from a tax perspective. And again, this is my personal, as a citizen on this committee, it's not just this. There are other things coming that and it's just adding on, right? So we have to be fiscally responsible, but at the same time, I stand behind what I said earlier, which is that we have a problem with the services that we're offering, and I do believe that, and I'm a conservative person, but the the issue with, cutting, if we're going to make some cuts to say, well, we think the future is going to be better, I don't see those things being back on the table in the future. And the other thing is that I do believe, and I don't know the process, but it seems very likely that if we didn't refer the city operating fee, which was a large, that alone would cover the $4 million use of working capital, at least by the math that I saw in the PowerPoint, and some, that would most likely be referred to voters, but maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. It seems like a large, I think it would, but who knows, right? And maybe there's ways to avoid that in a way that is good messaging, to say that this is the value, this is the city that we all live in, here's the services, and I would be interested in council exploring that, because that would help people like myself who just see it as another tax, right? We have the property taxes that went up. The school bond was passed. That was $600 more for me than now. We have a state tax coming in of gross revenue that's most likely, if the Republican senators show up, it's going to get passed. And on top of that, so it's just never ending, but we have a problem. This is not sustainable. So whether it's this year or next year, there's going to have to be more revenue. I get that. And I understand that. People need to understand that. And so the messaging of how we do that, and so that's my 20,000 foot level, sort of from a citizen's perspective. But at the same time, I don't think it should inform. I think that the youth development program is important. I believe in that program. Whether or not we had an $8 million revenue coming down the pike or not. And so those types of things I think we need to sort of separate, and I'm sure Budget Officer Jacobs would like us to at least approve the good governance budget before 9 o'clock. But
Member Sund, thank you for bringing us back around. Member Barker, followed by Vice Chair Nordick.
Thank you, Chair Cook. I do have a question, and maybe I was sleeping, I don't know, but this says elimination of 1.0 FTE staff assistant position in the legal department. But yet we're trying to move a position from community development over to the legal department.
I believe that was
so that's
for
not the
courts.
same. Okay, thank you.
That's okay. Vice Chair Nordyke.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I encourage the committee to identify what we can agree on and vote upon for the remainder of the evening.
Thank you, Vice Chair Nordyke. Member Kaiser.
Thanks. I guess just a clarification for how the budget is going to be presented to the council. It will be presented in these same outcome areas. Is that how is the council going to vote on the budget?
Sure.
The same way, or
Sure, if I could. This method of having you review the budget at your, what we thought might be your final meeting, was intended to allow you to look at result areas, and where there wasn't any proposed changes, any proposed amendments, you could get through them quickly. And I will tell you, if that is not going to work, we can very quickly shift. And what I would recommend, if I could, is that if we are set on having a meeting on the 15th, then I think the remainder of your time could potentially be best used identifying for us those things that you want staff to consider over the next week and bring back to you at a meeting on the 15th.
Thank you, Budget Officer Jacobs. Member Anderson, followed by
That's
Member
what
Anderson.
I was going to suggest, and I think what we might want to do is just establish now, it's clear there's going to be a motion on the youth programs. It's clear there's going to be something on the climate change, and I don't know if there are any other motions that anybody want to make, and if those are the only two, can't we approve every other budget area and just leave the two that the motions are going to be made to be discussed next week?
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Anderson, followed by Member Lewis.
Okay, kind of my 20,000-foot view is, to me, it was mentioned the idea of next year we'll be able to take care of some of these programs. And I want to just mention youth development is my top priority, but another big priority is DARE. Right now, our children are being targeted, and drug pushers know, as we all know, that if they can get a child addicted in the next year, it will be very, very difficult to get that child back. Earlier in the budget process, somebody mentioned the idea of prevention is more cost effective than catastrophic fixes. And we're talking about the roof, but I think that was a great metaphor, because preventive care that is DARE helps children in resisting drugs and that is much more cost-effective than a catastrophic fix later. It is a great investment. $150,000, $176,000 for youth development, $326,000 is a lot of money. But in terms of this, I think that it's well worth it. We're talking about preparing for the future, and I think both of those programs are worth it.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Lewis, followed by Member Hoy.
Okay, here's how I see it. I don't know if this is a recommendation or not, but if we are, in essence, going to come up with our wish list and forward that to the city manager and allow him to come back with suggestions on how to make that happen, then I just soon leave it all open. I don't want to restrict him from applying funds from one program because we happen to have approved another. So I just soon leave it all open, which leaves, in my opinion, as somebody who's been through this before, it leaves us with compiling the wish list, and I think we should get started on that.
And if I could please, if we could refer to this as, these would be budget amendments. You would actually be voting on a budget amendment to the city manager's proposed budget, and that requires 10 votes to actually secure a budget amendment.
Member Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't want to say this out loud, but I feel compelled to just address something that Member Anderson said. I agree with the sentiment of everything you said. I have to disagree with the DARE program. I'm not sure that the science supports it actually being effective. If it did, I'd be all over it, but I don't think it does. And so that's my concern about the DARE program. So while I have the mic, going off of my colleague to the next to me, my priorities for budget amendments would be the youth development position, the climate action plan, and the long-range planner. Those are my 3 priorities to add.
Thank you, Member Hoy. I would second all of those priorities as well. Member Sund.
Yeah. Thank you. The only other thing that has tonight, and I didn't really think a little bit, I mean, we've talked a lot about youth. We've talked a lot about, there's been great testimony of things that are being cut. The police chief's presentation, the data that we're seeing, the fact that we're in Salem with a higher prison, that, you know, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. I have a wife who stays at home. I also live on the outskirts, which was, for the fire map, sort of had me a little concerned, but it's a newer, yeah. But the point being, it's easy for me to look at the youth program I supported. It's sort of on the chopping block, so it was made very apparent to everyone and to the public. I'm not clear as a citizen, and this goes with something I said earlier. I know we can't take the revenue into consideration, but if the committee were to recommend that, for example, the police budget were to be improved to provide the service that we think the community deserves, whatever that is, whatever that metric is, if it's getting it down from or up from 1.13 to 1.15 or whatever wouldn't that be a good use of resources to justify future revenue? Versus, hey, we're only taking $4 million, but we're going to tax you $9 million, and then we'll figure out what to do with the other $5 million. And I know it's more than 9, but that's just the one. So, you know, and I have a hard time being that it's a lot of information of understanding what motion would I even make, or would anybody make, to say this is what police and fire, this is what they really need for the city of Salem today, right now, so that we can then I can go to my neighbors and my friends and my colleagues and say, it's not about just finding more revenue to just keep the status quo. It's that we're behind the status quo. It's not safe. It's not sustainable, not just from a revenue, but it's not sustainable from a livability. This is what it's going to take, and then here's now, and I feel like that will be a more successful campaign versus, well, we're only using $4 million. So, but again, I say all this to say, I don't know what even I would say. You know, add 50 staff? I mean, I don't, you know what I mean? It's too generic. And that could be something that maybe could be brought back next week of or is there not an ask? If there's not an ask, then that's okay too. But it seemed like with the data.
Thank you, Member Sund, for your comment. Member Nanki, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I suppose what it comes down to is where our Citizen Budget Committee members and the balance of, we're missing 5 people tonight. To make anything pass, we could have no more than 3 people vote against any motion. So what does that take to next meeting then, to bring back up as a secondary motion, again, depending on what the citizen members of the Budget Committee, council can add them in by themselves if they so choose, and whether or not we want to go through a couple of weeks of machinations to end up nowhere, to still have council end up doing something down the road. So I say we vote on whatever, or vote to recommend the manager's budget and let council handle it down the line on those smaller dollar issues, unless you really want to be part of that.
Thank you, Member Nanke. So what I'm hearing you say, if I'm hearing you correctly, is passing tonight and establishing those priority areas reflected from the Budget Committee for further action down the road.
If we can, I don't think we will be able to actually forward them to council. I think council is going to have to pick them up themselves based on the membership that's here tonight and how many people may want to add or take away from ending fund balance, or wait for a recommendation from the city manager in the course of 1 week to actually offset and figure out who else they may have to recommend for termination because we're putting something back in, or ripping money out of the ending fund balance, which I'm 100% opposed to, because I think we should actually have taken not as much as we did out of that ending fund balance for this budget proposal myself.
City Manager Powers?
Thank you, and if there is interest in Committee Member Nanke's proposal, we can certainly still, staff could certainly still provide to the Budget Committee the sustainable services revenue information that was discussed earlier. And I agree with Committee Member Nanke's summary of the challenge between now and next week in coming up with alternatives for your consideration to fund your priorities. Doing so would likely just result in another group coming in, or perhaps not, because they wouldn't have had the same 4 weeks, whatever, however long we've been at this notice of a potential change to their program. So I just, that will be a consideration that I will have, and I think the department head team will have as well.
Thank you. Member Nordyke.
Thank you. I came prepared to vote on a budget tonight, and the budget that I was prepared to vote for is one that would not cut youth development and would allow up to $50,000 for a climate action plan. I can't explain all those reasons on the record. I don't think it's necessary at this time. I think others have done an excellent job explaining themselves. I would be content with moving that budget forward and having council and or staff work out the details later. On a related note, budget committees are comprised not just of members of council, but members of the public by statute. Budgets are comprised of revenue as well as expenditures. And so budget committees should discuss revenue. That's all I have to say. And I really appreciate everyone's comments tonight, and I look forward to working in the future with my colleagues.
Thank you. Member Lewis.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm back where I was a few minutes ago. I really, and call it what you want, I call it the wish list. I really would appreciate getting those additional items, whether they're additions or deletions, to the proposed budget, getting them on record, and having the Budget Committee voice their opinion. Whether there's 5 people gone or not, this is the process. I, for one, do want to hear as much as possible from the budget, the Citizens Budget Committee. And so I'm going back to my original recommendation is, let's start the motions, go through the process, see where we get.
So if I may defer to Budget Officer Jacobs, we're still on the first subject area, and guys, not wanting to discourage discussion, but we still have 5 more to go. We're going to be doing a motion on each of these subject areas.
Well,
but we've already heard some amendments that may fall into other areas. Can you help us with those?
I can,
Perfect.
I think. Again, this approach to reviewing the budget and doing your final deliberation was an approach. You're not required to do it this way. It was an idea to be able to work you through the entire budget. And so I would suggest, if I could, that if this committee has items that it would like to bring forward to amend the city manager's proposed budget, that you bring those items forward, motion and vote, and that will inform the entire committee in regard to the direction that we need to go.
Wonderful, thank you, Budget Officer Jacobs. Member Nanki.
My question would be is whether or not, because we have to be open-ended, whether or not we consider this as a calendar. And I could make a motion to look at all portions of the budget as a calendar. And then we could actually leave that open for future depending on what we bring back. Because if we close a certain element off, that
Right.
it's going to have to be opened up again
Right.
for the city manager to review something.
At this point, given the nature of the discussion, I wouldn't recommend closing anything off. I think we need to hear how you may wish to amend the city manager's budget. I think we need to get that. We need to find out if there is concurrence among committee members to actually move an amendment forward, a budget amendment forward. And I think we should probably take them one at a time.
Okay.
So I'm looking for
Let's do it.
motions, and Vice Chair Nordike, you had your hand up.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have a motion. I would like to amend the city budget to, as you can see on page 4 of the document, under the proposed budget, there's the discontinuation of the youth development program and the elimination of the related equivalent outreach/education coordinator position. I move to amend the budget to remove that point and therefore continue the youth development program.
Second?
Moved by Vice Chair Nordike, seconded by Member Hoy.
No, by me.
By Member Anderson. Okay, guys, we're going to have to start being more visible when we're seconding things. Thank you. Any discussion? Member Moore Green.
Thank you. And I might be the only one, but I kind of want to default to what Member Lewis has said, just to put together the list instead of amending each one of these and having the city manager come back with how he would do that. But I want to have that discussion on revenue. We're still working as if we've had no discussion on revenue, to Member Nordike's point. Or am I missing something?
I appreciate your passion and your interest in the subject as well. If I can defer to either Budget Officer Jacobs or City Manager Powers about the revenue discussion, we still do have a motion on the floor as well. So,
I realize that.
no problem. You're fine. You're good.
So, and certainly open to discussion. The moving forward to amend the budget, if we reconvene on May 15th, if the manager comes back with additional information for you, if we have a motion from this body to amend the budget, then we can very specifically address that amendment to the budget. But without an amendment, if it's just everything's on a wish list and we may use this or we may not use this, we may reinstate this in the budget or we may not, it makes it a little more difficult for staff to actually prepare a response to that. So, but if we have an actual amendment to the budget, if you vote as a committee to amend the budget, then we have very clear direction.
And speaking to the revenue portion as well, we'll do that after the vote. Does that sound agreeable to everyone? Okay, we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, who do I ask to repeat the motion back?
You can ask me.
Oh, perfect. Would you mind repeating your motion, please?
I would be happy, Madam Chair. The motion is to amend the fiscal year 2020 City of Salem budget to continue the youth development program and to not eliminate the 1.0 full-time equivalent outreach/education coordinator position in the general fund.
Wonderful. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Okay, how can I count with voices? Let's check. Okay. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3,
It
4,
fails.
4 nays.
Motion fails.
It fails.
Motion fails. And I found Motion fails. All right. Member Anderson.
I move we amend the budget to include up to $50,000 for, I move we amend the budget to include up to $15,000 for community development to instigate climate action or environmental action plan.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Anderson, seconded by Councilor Hoy.
I see.
Discussion.
Thank you. I see the city manager's getting ready to say something here. And now he's back. Yeah, I don't know, Steve, you were kind of looking like you wanted to say something.
Just a clarification for staff. The $50,000 as proposed by Development Director Wright in his staff memo to the Budget Committee, or a different application related to...
$50,000 for use of a consultant to assist the city in the environmental action plan.
And Norm, why don't you come down here? His recommendation or proposal to the Budget Committee was that $50,000 would be for continuation of the greenhouse gas inventory and reporting.
Yeah, that is correct. That's the recommendation for the 50,000 from our staff report. And just to echo and reiterate what we had discussed earlier, a consultant for a climate action plan based on all the guidance that we've received from partner cities and other experts in the state would cost $120,000.
Well, what I heard you say was that the entire implementation would cost $120,000, not that the consultant would cost $120,000.
Yeah, my apologies if that was somehow. I don't remember saying that, but I apologize for not being clear. The actual implementation of such a plan through such a program would actually be significantly greater. As mentioned in the report, it would be at minimum a little over $300,000 for a narrow band of services and greater than $600,000 for a more holistic, broad program.
Well, is consultant services, isn't that different than implementation of a plan?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I've heard you say it would cost $120 to $300 to $600 for implementation, which is a different thing than consulting.
The $120,000 would be to hire a consultant at the recommended guided rate that we've received from our partners to deliver the plan itself. And then that's a one-time expense. The continued implementation of such a plan is where we get into the $300,000 or the $600,000 range, and that is for recurring expense for FTEs to carry forward action from the plan that the consultant would help us deliver.
And is the $50,000 that you were coming down to discuss as your budget recommendation, is that for something other than a consultant?
That is also for a consultant, but that is for a consultant for the greenhouse gas inventory to manage and maintain and deliver that on an annual basis.
And my question was, the intent of the motion, was it for specifically the greenhouse gas work, or was it to get started?
I'm amending the city manager's budget, so that's another $50,000.
The $50,000 that we're referring to is not in my proposed budget. That was information. That was information that was provided by Director Wright in an information report to the Budget Committee. And my question is the $50,000 that the Budget Committee may ask be added, is that specifically for the greenhouse gas inventory, or is it to get started on a climate action plan? Two distinct uses of $50,000, which I want to make sure I'm understanding so we don't have confusion later.
And just to add to what the city manager is explaining here, the implications here is that $50,000, if specifically for climate action, is sufficient by our estimations for a greenhouse gas inventory, but $50,000 is roughly 40% of what we would need, given our bandwidth and given our recommendation of partner cities, to deliver a climate action plan. So that is the real importance here, is that $50,000 for a climate action plan would be very, very difficult for us to deliver in any scope, and certainly with our resources, our staff as we have them today.
And thank you for the clarification. Then I will restate my motion that I move to amend the budget to allocate $50,000 for the Community Development Department to move forward on further implementation of a climate action plan. And by saying that, what that does is it leaves it up to you as to how you're going to spend that $50,000.
Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I'm slightly confused, not by your motion, but by what Manager Powers is saying. Am I understanding correctly that you're saying that there is already $50,000 allocated for an environmental or a greenhouse gas inventory, and I'm hearing and seeing people shake their heads? So there's a recommendation from staff that $50,000 be allocated towards a greenhouse gas inventory.
There is not $50,000 in the proposed budget. The $50,000 figure came from an information report that Norm provided in response to Budget Committee questions regarding climate action, our Salem, continuing the greenhouse gas inventory.
Yeah.
And I was concerned that the $50,000 might not have been coincidental, and I just was wanting to make sure.
Thanks for the clarification.
That explains my motion even more. I mean, I'm not saying 50,000 plus 50,000. I'm saying the 50,000 that you discussed tonight in the report.
So somehow, thank you, Member Anderson, my watch is actually slow because I'm showing it's just 9 o'clock. I think I need an amendment to... You're kidding. All right. Just to remember, my kid's bedtime was a while ago. We've still got 5 more governance areas, and I believe Budget Officer Jacobs. Okay, well, hold on. Let's just make sure we're going to get through this. Okay, I'm with you. But in just a point of clarification, we can move forward with this, and then, if I heard you correctly, come back with specific amendments so that staff in the next meeting would be able to provide. Is that correct?
What I had advocated at this point, and I know it's a change of change of course, but let's be clear about what amendments are out there for this proposed budget. Let's get through that. Let's disregard, and you know what I think I'll do?
Look at that.
Whoops, that doesn't help. There we go. So let's deal with the amendments. And my understanding right now is that we have 2 motions. We have an amended motion, and then we have the previous motion. So is that true? I mean, that was what we heard.
I get to talk finally after 5 years of coming to Budget Committee. So there was an original motion for the 50,000, and then you expressed an amendment to your motion that I don't believe was seconded. So if it was seconded, great, then you need to act on that amendment first, then go back to the main motion as amended.
Okay, could I make it a substitute motion, because it is a little different? Okay, yeah, so Member Nanki saying I could withdraw all motions and just make another one, but I think I would like to say my second motion was a substitute motion for the first motion, then we only have to vote once on the substitute motion.
And I would ask you just to restate it, just for clarity.
As a substitute motion, I move that the budget, yeah, I move what I said earlier. No, I move that the Community Development Department be directed to allocate $50,000 in its budget to begin implementation of the Climate Action Plan.
Second.
That's different. That's different.
Okay.
You didn't give me $50,000 at all.
All right.
Okay, I move to amend the budget to add the sum of, no, I'm making a substitute motion. My substitute motion is that an additional $50,000 be allocated to the Community Development Department to initiate implementation of a climate action plan.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Anderson, seconded by Vice Chair Nordike. Do we have any discussion? All right. Motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving Member Anderson's motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
All right, let's see if we can count the hands. All right, so motion fails. All right, Member Lewis.
Yeah, I'm going to see if this works, but I'm going to propose an amendment to the budget that would add $50,000 for the continuation of the greenhouse gas emissions survey or test, whatever you want to call it, the results.
All right, I have a motion from Member Lewis about $50,000 for the greenhouse gas emissions. Do I have a second? Second from Member Hoy. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Member Lewis.
Yeah, it's obvious this is a very sensitive issue to folks, and I've said from the beginning that if we're going to have anything that's not measurable, then it's useless. The continuation of this measurement is something that we started this year. We've got the first chapter of it, and to continue it, I think, will do us a great deal of service, irregardless of which direction we go in the future.
Thank you, Member Lewis. A motion's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving Member Lewis's motion to continue the greenhouse gas emission monitoring, please say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Can I see hands? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, motion fails. All right. Member Hoy.
I move to amend the city manager's proposed budget to add back the long-range planner position of the Community Development Department.
All right, I have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Please raise your hand if you seconded it. Thank you, Councilor Member Kaiser. All those in, is there any discussion on this motion? Member Kaiser.
I heard somebody say, I hope not. I just want to say, this is I feel this is a critical position that we need. We have one long-range planner for the city. We're the second largest city. We're growing. We need somebody there that is thinking long-term, not just this year or the next 2 years, but somebody who's thinking 30 years out as we develop the city. So I think it's vital that we have this position.
Member Anderson.
Look at all the things that were listed on Norm's screen of here are the problems we have already, it's manageable, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 now with the climate action. So this needs to be done.
All right, Member Hoy.
Thank you. I agree that this is, I made the motion. This is probably the most consequential decision we'll make in this budget, I think, in terms of the future of the city, and I would encourage everybody to vote for it.
Member Sund.
How long has this position, thank you, Madam Chair. How long has this position been vacant?
The position has been vacant for, I'm going to estimate 10 months.
And is it a recruiting issue or just specialized expertise that we're looking for that we can't find?
Primarily, it is because we have had to balance our department budget the best we can, stretch our dollars as best we can to fund a variety of other needs within the department itself, and so thereby using the savings of this position to do so.
So then if we were to approve this motion, what would be the cost of that? What's got to give if you're currently using that to balance the rest of your budget?
There's nothing that would have to give per se. The cost of this position, Kelly Jacobs showed me a figure a little while ago, and I had estimated rather high for what I thought it was, and I believe it was 105?
108,560.
Okay, 108,560. So that's the cost of the position.
And just to follow up, Director Wright, with long-term planning and a vision to accommodate the population as it is, what are the potential cost savings by being able to have a planner that's focused in that area?
The cost savings brought on by the work that this planner would do, is that the question? I just want to make sure, Madam Chair. It's hard for me to estimate. Everything...
So priceless.
That's exactly right.
Perfect.
Everything is predicated on future action from the plans that these individuals deliver.
Thank you. We have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Had discussion. All right, all those in favor of approving Councillor Hoy's motion?
If I could please,
yes.
So the motion needs to include the cost.
I think Councillor Hoy would be happy to amend that.
108,560.
108,560. I will amend my motion to include the cost of 108,560.
Do we have a second on the amended motion?
Whatever.
A second from Member Kaiser. Thank you. Do we have a discussion on the amended motion? Wonderful. All right, all those in favor of approving Councillor Member Hoy's amended motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right, hands, please. 1, 2, 3. I think that still passes then. Motion passes. All right. Amendment passes.
Now we have to go back to the main motion as amended.
Man, you're so good at this. All right, so
Not legal.
back to the main motion then. We're keeping everything legal and above board. Could I have some help with that motion, please? Wonderful.
I believe the motion was exactly the same except for the cost of the position.
All right, so I have a motion from Member Hoy, seconded from Member Kaiser. Any discussion on the original amendment? Member Anderson.
I actually have one quick question.
Of course.
The $108,000, if that was directed to add the long-term planner, what programs or services would need to be cut in order to pay for that?
That's what he's going to
It's
say.
his job.
They're telling us.
No problem. All right, further discussion? Member Hoy.
Just to clarify, do we need to pass this motion for the other one to be in effect as well, or can we not pass this one? I'm confused.
So I would love some clarification about that as well.
My understanding is that the motion that just was approved was an amendment to the main motion, so now you need to vote on the main motion as amended.
Okay. So I need 10 votes again.
All right, so Member Hoy, would you like to restate your main motion? All right, Councillor Kaiser, would you like to second that main motion? All right, perfect. So all those in favor of the main motion, please respond by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
I would like to abstain. Are you not allowed to abstain on that?
All right, so let's get the hands up then for all those who,
You realize the motion passes if you abstain.
You can't abstain. Our rules don't allow you to abstain.
all right, I need to get a count to see if the motion passes or not. So let's go ahead, since the ayes, I think, were higher than the nays, let's count the nays. 1, 2, 3. Motion passes. All right.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
My understanding is we need 10 votes to approve a motion. If Member Anderson abstained, that's 9 yes votes. So it's
So
not
the
10.
motion doesn't pass. Is Member Anderson allowed to abstain?
Yes.
All right. So now we're back at the main motion, but the amendment has passed. No. Motion fails. All right. Moving forward. Member Anderson.
We've made so many. Did we talk about the youth resources program?
Yes, it failed.
Okay, so everything failed.
Everything failed.
Okay.
We tried.
All right. Yes, Member Kaiser.
Y'all are gonna love this one. It's just fun. It's actually the
Well, don't
homeless rental
talk it up.
assistance program. So I would like to make a motion to fully fund the homeless rental assistance program at $1.4 million.
Motion made by Member Kaiser, seconded by Member Leung. Do we have any discussion?
And I'll speak to my motion. This has been one of the most successful programs we've done as a city over the last couple of years. I know it's expensive, but it has worked. And we've placed over 100 people that are no longer homeless because of this program. I think I spoke before that people who are registered sex offenders are not eligible to receive federal vouchers because of rules surrounding that. This is one of the only programs when you can use city funds that we can actually house those folks. And if you don't think that they deserve housing, I would beg you to think again, because many of those folks are living on the streets, and they have even less resources than people who don't have those offenses. I think I understand it's expensive, but I think it's crucial, and homelessness is one of the most impactful things happening in our community right now.
Thank you, Member Kaiser. City Manager Powers, did you have a comment?
Thank you. If I may, I believe this is appropriate. Certainly before you consider that motion, and I certainly appreciate the support for the program and the desire to add resources back. I do think, however, it would be important for the Budget Committee to hear some very practical information that Kristen Rutherford has for you this evening as you consider allocating resources. And I think after you hear that information, there may be an alternative that could still indicate city support for that program without tying up resources.
Member Kaiser.
Point of clarification, though, for this process. My understanding, and Budget Officer Kelly, when we're doing these amendments to the budget, we're not yet passing the total budget. These are amendments that will then come back to us so that we can see how the city manager is planning to incorporate those amendments into the budget. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
You're amending the budget. You're basically voting to amend the budget. You're putting it in.
But until we see the final budget with the amendments, we won't vote on the whole budget.
You won't vote on the whole
Right,
budget.
thank
That's
you.
correct.
And the information that Kristen has to share has nothing to do with where the money's coming from. So if I may.
Director Rutherford.
Good evening, Kristen Rutherford, Urban Development Director, and I'm going to ask Nicole Utes, who is our acting administrator of the Housing Authority, to also come down to help field any questions that you may have. If additional money is allocated to HRAP, we would still have a challenge with getting that money out the door. And the challenge there is tied to the number of units that are available to house people. So you could put multiple millions of dollars towards this program, and we still wouldn't have enough units to be able to place them in. So at the rate that we have been onboarding new units into the program and getting landlords that are willing to sign up, it's going to take us about 25 to 30 months right now to get enough units to house the people that are already in the queue in this program. So the proposal to reduce the amount allocated to this program is really to right-size what we can spend based on the number of homes that are available with the budget. So we have also applied to get Medicaid approval, and I'll let Nicole speak to this a little bit more, but we've learned recently that we've received approval for that, so that also brings some new budgetary resources to the program.
Hi, I'm Nicole Utes. I'm the acting housing administrator. I do appreciate all the support for the HRAP program. It is a very successful program. 52 people are in the process of graduating into vouchers at this time. That is a huge success rate from the 144 that we have onboarded. We currently have 92 that are still out there in the process of transitioning into the voucher program. Our biggest hurdle, as many had seen in the Statesman Journal in the past weeks, is the fact that the one-bedroom average rent is over $800 per month. That is very difficult for us to meet, even with the HRAP ability and the rents. These individuals are stabilized, hopefully in place for 12 months, and our hope is that they can continue to use a voucher in the same home so they're not put back out to restabilize into another unit. That would require us to find units in the $750 range. Those units in this town that are in decent, safe, and livable condition are very, very few and far between. So, as Kristen stated, we committed to the City of Salem that we would continue to find other resources to fund this program. We are on a mission to get our Medicaid reimbursement set up in place so that our case managers can be funded through Medicaid reimbursement, and we should have that running this year. That will hopefully bring in significant revenue for us to continue to fund this program, as well as we will have some carryover fund from the previous year as well.
So I just wanted to make sure the Budget Committee understood if additional funds were restored, we'd still have that problem of the lack of available units.
Member Kaiser.
Well, thanks, and I appreciate the additional information. I guess one of my questions is if it sounds like perhaps I understand that rentals at that price point are difficult to find. I don't know what rentals at a higher price point, if the difficulty remains at the same level or not, and if additional funding can help get folks into those rentals. So that's I guess a consideration is if we need to move our price point up because our market is moving up. I don't know, but it's something for the committee to consider.
Are you wanting, I can speak on to that. The fact of the matter is that, yes, we could take additional funds and put that towards a unit at a much higher rate, most of them in the $1,000 range. But the problem would be when they graduate, they're going to have to move because the voucher program does not allow a fair market rent for that for a one-bedroom apartment. Our goal and our hopes is that we can see more affordable housing brought into the area that are one bedrooms, that we can get some decent, safe, and we're working with every developer that we can find to try to and make incentives to give us some units from every new development.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. This whole thing has been a real quandary for me because generally I would say I'm in favor of spending as much money as we can on the people who need the most help in our community. But just so I understand it, what you are saying is even if we were to keep the allocation at $1.4 million, you would not be able to spend more than $700,000 of that because of the issues we've just talked about.
We're on average bringing about 7 new clients into a new rental every month. So what we have figured out is that with the carryover funding and with the funding of $700,000, we believe we can continue to sustain this and look for other options so that the city doesn't have to be a sole funder of HRAP.
Well, again, what you're saying is that $700,000 would not be spent because you can't find the units and you can't get the vouchers and of all the problems we have.
Spending more than the 700,000.
Yeah.
We think the 700 is the right amount. To spend more than that, yes, we could potentially spend more per unit. We would still have an issue with supply of units.
Yeah.
But we could spend a little more per
You have
unit
two
and
issues.
increase that a little
You have supply,
bit.
and then you have, once your subsidy is over,
Right.
then there's not going to be the vouchers from HUD, and we talk about
Yes.
that almost every time. There's not going to be vouchers from HUD, so these people will be out in the street after a year.
Or they'll have to move again.
Okay.
And certainly, committee members and counselors, if we're able to adjust that point, if there are opportunities to increase the supply or additional city resources would be needed, I would certainly bring that back to you for an amendment mid-year.
All right, so apparently I'm taking over, haha. New sheriff in town. No, I'm kidding. All right. So we had a motion on the floor. Is there further discussion on the motion? Thank you. Thank you much. Is there further discussion? I'll add a little point. Like Councilor Anderson, I feel strongly in funding all homeless programming to the extent that we are able. But as pointed out in the city manager's budget message, this is about right-sizing a program, not cutting it short. So I think the programming information set forth by city staff is very helpful and insightful. Further discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo, excuse me, your comments. I really want to vote for this motion, but I just don't think I can tonight, unfortunately. I want to support anything we can do to help reduce our homeless population and help assist folks who need it the most, but I just don't see that it's going to actually do that, even if we vote for it.
Member Anderson.
Yeah, somewhat echoing, but not to waste any time. I really wish that there was more capacity, and if there ever is more capacity, then I hope that this gets revisited by the Budget Committee, but as it is, it seems like it wouldn't solve anything.
Did we have a second on the motion? There was a second. All right, it's now time to vote. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Aye. Motion fails. Are there any other motions this evening? Okay.
Madam Chair or Vice Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes. Oh, you're back. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
I tried to signal you to come
As you wish. Okay. I thought you were
No,
gone
that's
for the
good.
night. All
It's
right,
hard to do it discreetly. Thank you, Vice Chair Nordyke, for your excellent leadership. All right. Where are we on the agenda? Are there any additional amendments? Member Sun?
I just have a point of clarification. I know that we already voted the motion on the youth development program. Does that mean that all aspects of that proposed cut in the budget that's in front of us are no longer on the, like we can't, or can there be a revised motion? I mean,
Are you asking if you can make an additional motion
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
different? I think you're available to make a motion.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, the workforce changes box in the youth development program on page 156 states that the proposed budget includes the elimination of the program in the neighborhood enhancement division, includes 1.0 FTE of outreach, education, as well as program expenses and grants. Can we get some clarification on the allocation of the cost between the FTE program and, well, I'll just make the motion. I motion that we amend the budget to include the 1.0 FTE outreach education coordinator.
I second it.
So I have a
I
motion.
need a dollar amount for that, budget officer.
So I have a motion made by Member Sun, seconded by Member.
Hold on.
I don't want to have to do the double
You're wanting to
motion.
make the
You don't
additional.
have to do a substitute
Thank
motion.
That sounds perfect.
Get the dollar amount.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're consulting because I don't know the exact amount for that position. So as your budget officer, I would suggest that we use $125,000 as the amount for the position.
Okay.
Because we have approximately, I think, $50,000 in grants in that program.
Thank you,
So then
Budget
I-
Officer Jacobs. Your motion, Member Sun.
My motion is to amend the FY 2020 budget to include the 1.0 FTE outreach education coordinator at the cost of $125,000.
I have a motion made by Member Sun, seconded by Member Kaiser. Is there any discussion? Member Hoy.
I have a question for staff. Will the position actually be able to accomplish anything without the supporting revenue or funds to go with it?
What an excellent question, Member Hoy. Director Wright.
Yeah, I have to come over here because I may have to pull something up. I want to first commend Kelly on the estimate of 125. In looking at our information here, Chris and I, the personnel costs themselves are $122,370, and materials and services is about $3,300. So we're almost right on for both the personnel costs as well as the material and supplies that are necessary for the program. Regarding the question of what could be done if only that were restored, I first want to draw a little bit of information for the rest of the program itself. The program itself is budgeted this year, this current active fiscal year, at $176,000. So $125,000 goes towards personnel, material, and supplies. The other $50,000 goes towards the grants and contracts and services that are the programs that this person coordinates and leads. So to really answer your question about what those programs are, we do have a basic presentation that I can provide, and then really and truly, Lori is here tonight, our Youth Development Program Coordinator. She can speak to more detail on some of this than I can, though it would really put her on the spot. It's very difficult. It's difficult even for me to do this without almost leaning towards advocacy. But to explain this in the simple terms, I'm going to try to, right at the end, okay. I'm going to try to just go right down through some of these items and get to here. So the Welcoming and Livable Community section here, we have the Youth Development Coordinator. You can see here these bullet points that are on the slide. The position itself convenes and builds community partnerships, provides event management. It's the air traffic controller, if you will, for a variety of services. Does grant management and administration of those grants that constitute the $50,000 that's in the current year budget. Does guest speaking training. Effectively, as the Bridgeways Recovery Services client has shared in the past, this individual is the glue for a number of programs. So it serves a number of partnerships, whether it be SCEF, Marion County, Polk County, the Community Action Agency, Boys and Girls Club, and many more. And the simple, straightforward explanation that I can give is that if you can imagine a continuum of care for our youth, where every single one of those entities on the outer orbit of that graphic provide some type of service, there is still some other service within that continuum that is not met. And not only does this position provide the glue, it also fills those gaps with those services. So the list of programs are here. This is a very long list. The question, Councilor Hoy, about which of these programs could still be served without the $50,000 of funding that is associated with the program by just only having the FTE cost itself absorbed. I'd like to think that it's pretty sizable, given the fact that, again, there's coordination effort that takes place here, there's speaking, engagement, there's active involvement with the youth in each one of these programs, but that's a very simple, straightforward answer, somewhat generic, and so we can get into deeper details with Lori if necessary, but some of this could continue without the grant funding in some capacity, though it would be difficult, but I imagine manageable.
Thank you, Director Wright. Member Sund.
So on that list, CareCorps, which I had mentioned, in a previous meeting, being very supportive of that program, out of that 50, just to give some, some scope here, because we're talking about, some very generic numbers. How much is that?
I can speak a little bit to this, but I'm going to have to ask Lori to be more specific. In looking at our budgeted breakout for all of the grants and funding, $24,000 of the $50,000 go for SCEF and the after-school program. So let's take that out. Then you get to Teen Action and a couple other programs, and I'm going to, I'm not going to guess.
Well, that actually
Lori, can you speak a little bit to the specifics on it? What was the program again? I'm sorry.
The CareCorps.
CareCorps.
Good evening, committee. My name's Lori Shaw Casarez, and I'm the Youth Development Coordinator here at the city. Specifically to CareCorps, it's about $11,000. It can range between 10 and 15, depending on the year and how much I have saved from my other spending within any given year. Having said that, the $24,000 that is allocated for SCEF and after-school programs, about, I want to say about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we pulled $4,000 from that. And actually, because CareCorps is a collaboration with SCEF, $4,000 of that actually goes towards CareCorps. So in my $11,000 to $15,000 that we put towards CareCorps every year, we actually, part of that is $4,000 that in the line item that says $24,000 for after-school programs for the school district and SCEF, we actually pull $4,000 from that. And that was in agreement with SCEF because CareCorps is a bridge program for middle schoolers entering high school. So we justified it's going to the same group, it's going to the same mission, it's part of their list of summertime programming, out of school time programming for middle school. It's just that they're rising ninth graders. So again, in answer to my $50,000 to spend, CareCorps ranges between $11,000 and $15,000 every summer. And that's a result of a 5-year grant from the Salem Kaiser School District. Early on, when we first developed this, it was about $25,000 per year for 5 years. The city of Salem has sustained at a significantly lower budget amount, but we've kept the program alive, and it is definitely one of our most effective for a considerably less amount of money every year.
Thank you.
Member Leung.
Thank you. Another follow-up question. One of the, several of the students, when they've been testifying the last few weeks, also talked about the 1,000 Souls shoe drive.
Mm-hmm.
How much money goes towards that particular program?
Aside from my coordination time, I would say probably $200 or $300 in overall year-round printing costs for promotional marketing in the schools. We have posters up and that sort of thing. And then an additional probably $500 for shoe cleaning supplies. When we run shoe cleaning sessions, where high school students come and knock out service hours and give back in this way, we can't always rely on donations for shoelaces and polish and that sort of thing. So that's it. That's all the more it costs.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. This whole discussion to me is way too much micromanaging by the budget committee. If we're in favor of these programs, we should have voted for the whole thing. Because now we're sitting here and saying, well, we can fund the staff thing, but staff position, but none of these things will really be done. So what are you going to do as the staff member? So it just doesn't make sense to me. If you're for the person, you ought to be for the program. But that was voted down earlier. So, I don't know how I'm going to vote here, because if I vote for the person and the position, it's going to be somebody who can't do things because we didn't also vote for the funding for it.
So,
Member Sun, do you have a gavel over there?
Sorry, I grabbed that a little bit too forcefully. Shouldn't have had the decaf. I did. That's not what I heard. I heard that, if you go back a slide, the reason why I made the motion, and I was also told prior to that I could make any motion I wanted, so I don't consider it micromanaging.
You're not in trouble.
Thank you.
It's fine.
I know. Is that this piece, your role in this, whether the grant program, and I believe that the city of Salem, and I know the people who support CareCorps, and I know Ike and Isaac's Room and other programs would step up, and we would get the funding that from the grant funding. It could probably happen on that level, but the coordination that happens here. This is a piece that, as I talk to people, and as the testimony was given, that is an unmet need within this web. And so I didn't hear when the question was asked by by Member Hoy, I didn't hear, oh yeah, I mean, if we cut the 50 out of the 125, it pretty much what's the point? It's either all or nothing. I'm hearing that there is a very valuable service to the youth of our community, and then an opportunity to get a little bit creative because we're going to be cutting some of that funding. That's what I heard, but I could be wrong.
Just to reiterate, that is the precise thing that I'm trying to explain here is that the coordination piece, the engagement piece is as vital from what I understand, from what partners have explained, and from what Lori has demonstrated again and again. That is as vital to the program, if not more so, than some of the funding for some of the programs. So that is correct with what I'm trying to explain.
Thank you, Director Wright. I, too, have a question for Lori. As far as the funding goes and your leveraging, because I know your time is valuable, but out of that grant funding, what does it turn into? And I know in your presentation you talked about fund leveraging as well.
I don't know if that slide could be pulled up as an example.
This side?
There, I think for the snapshot of iLead, do we have that one? With any funding that I receive, whether it's general fund spending or it would be a mini grant that I may secure for something in particular, for sure we tend to double it in leveraging, if not quadrupling. I mean, depending on what it is we're working on and the support from the community and businesses in different sectors that we get. If you add in volunteer time and in-kind time from collaborators that join forces with us, which is everything I do, is a collaboration with the community. Sometimes it's 15 times more than what I started with. So the name of the game in youth work in general is taking a very small amount and leveraging to make it a bigger impact. So does that answer?
It does. I'm just wondering, based on the discussion, taking away the leveraging pot as far as your financial contribution and relying solely on time, and recognizing partners that are already at the table, if they would be able to support that programming. Do you see that as being workable or feasible? What's your thought?
I think that we are all very creative, the collaborations that we have and the partners and the support that we do have in the community already. I think we're a very creative and innovative and resourceful group, and we can figure it out.
Thank you. So I think I have a motion. I think I have a second. Member Kaiser.
So just to get clarification on the motion, the motion is to just fund the position, but not the additional funding that it currently has for grants. Am I correct?
Correct.
Member Leung.
That means the youth development program piece would be not funded if...
Are you asking for clarification on the motion?
Yes.
It's my understanding, Member Sun, that this is funding to fund the position.
Right. So again, going back to the language in the budget on page 156, I would consider the youth development program to be all-encompassing of the position and the grants and expenses. So what I've proposed in the motion is to parse it out and not cut the entire thing, but to add back the FTE of Outreach Education Coordinator, as we've discussed, as that hub to the community, and then therefore can leverage that resource. So the youth development program is all-encompassing. I don't consider that to be cut if this motion was passed.
All right, so clarification on the motion. Any further discussion? All right, I have a motion on the floor with a second. All those in favor of Member Sun's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
All right, can I have a hands on the nay? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. All right. Okay, guys. 1 second. Any other amendments to City Manager Powers' budget at this time? Excellent. Budget Officer Jacobs.
And actually, seeing no further amendments, are you prepared to vote on the recommended budget?
I believe so. Budget Officer Jacobs. Discussion, Member Kaiser, did you have a question? No?
Since there's no amendments, there'd be nothing for the city manager to bring back for a future meeting. So I will say, this is maybe out of the order of things, I'm a little disappointed we don't have more members of our budget committee here and haven't for the last 2 meetings. And that's extremely disappointing, especially when people sign up, they're here tonight, they're giving their time. This is very important, and for people to say they're going to commit to a meeting or a committee and then not be here is detrimental to the process. And it gives power actually for people for not being here. And I don't think that's fair to the budget committee. And I know our rule is 10, but we could also alter that rule to say that if there's a quorum here, then that's what,
Majority rule.
Majority rules, because essentially when people are absent, they have power to, it's a no vote, essentially. So anyways, I'm not making a motion to do that, but it's a consideration. And I guess I don't know, I'm just a little disappointed by the lack of attendance.
Thank you, Member Kaiser. All right, guys, it's getting late. So,
I had a question.
Vice Chair Nordike.
Thank you. So I want to make sure I understand what our options are moving forward at this point. Option A, you vote on the budget, which may or may not pass. Because I know that there were several individuals, myself included, who were dissatisfied with the budget as drafted, and that's why we moved to amend, and every single motion failed. Option B would be to move to adjourn the meeting and see if we have better attendance at the next meeting and attempt again the same amendments that were made tonight. I don't think we need 4 hours to do that. I think if we start the meeting on time at 6 o'clock, we'll know immediately whether we have the numbers to change the budget. And if we don't, we move to approve the budget. And if that motion passes, just to be clear to folks who may be new to the budget committee, that doesn't mean that's our budget. It goes to city council. So any decision that we make here is not a contract signed in blood. It's only a recommendation to city council. Those are just some options that I lay out for the consideration of the committee.
Well said, Vice Chair Nordike. Thank you for your input. Member Anderson.
I move we adopt the budget as proposed by the city manager.
It's been moved by Member Anderson, seconded by Member Danke. Is there any discussion of the city manager's budget? Member Anderson.
I appreciate both Member Kaiser and Member Nordike's comments, but, and I was on the, I voted for every amendment. I think they all went down 9. What didn't I vote for?
All right, guys, let's not get lost in the weeds.
But I think the bottom line is what Vice Chair Nordike says. This will come to the council. And so, yeah, well, I don't want to say what's the point, but I would say that already we've got the people who here voted, and it was all like 8-5 or 9-4. It was. There were more people wanting to pass the amendments than didn't want to pass the amendments. So I think that's something the council will take into consideration when we meet. And this has happened in the past where the budget committee has recommended something. And I can recall one vote where it was like all the councilors who were there voted to do it, and all the budget committee members who were there voted not to do it. And when it came to council, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. So I think we'll just continue these discussions at council, and I don't see any point of coming back for another vote. And I really also want to thank the Citizen Budget Committee members for all the time and hard work and effort you put in, because this is a very complicated, complex, tough process, and it gets tougher when it gets to the council. So thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any further discussion? Member Sund, followed by Vice Chair Nordike.
Although doing so, passing this motion, and then it goes to city council, and if the city council takes it into consideration that there was pretty much 9 votes on all, and then it sort of, oh, okay, and then you end up including it. Although doing so might be good in favor of motions that I myself might have made and be in favor of, who knows? But the reality is then it somewhat discourages me from the overall process. To your point, Councilwoman Kaiser, if we had more people, then we got the 10th vote or the 11th, whatever it was, would the motions have passed? I guess I needed clarification. It's not.
Maybe.
Right, so if there was more people here and they voted in favor of those motions, all of them would have passed. It would, not that I'm, proposing another meeting necessarily, and hopefully my wife's not watching, but, if it was quick and we had the attendance and it was, hey, here are the motions, because it would be better for me to know that the Budget Committee's input was taken, and then but of course I know that even then it could still be changed by the City Council. But the one question I had in this rant is, it is just clarifying that it's the number of yes votes that makes the motion. Okay, all right, thank you.
That's correct, Member Sun. Member Anderson, followed by Member Barker.
Okay, first of all, since this may be the last time that I talk to many of you, I want to thank all the members of the City Council, as well as the mayor and the city manager and all of the staff. Being a resident of Salem, this has been a wonderful insight into how the city works. I walk away here very disappointed about the youth development program. I hope the City Council puts it back in, but very optimistic about this robust city we live in. And thank you guys for being willing to do this. So much of us are not willing to do this year round. Thank you very much, because you guys make a city that enables us to live the life that we live. So I thank you for that. In response to the Budget Committee, I'm more than happy to come back next week. I'm also more than happy to have the evening off, but I think that Councilman Anderson's motion is really geared towards, we respect the vote of the Budget Committee. They have voted. We will take into account the vote that was there, and then the City Council will take it from here. I don't think it was invalidating to our input at all.
Member Barker.
Thank you, Chair Cook. I would just like to reiterate what Mr. Sun said. I have testified not as a committee member, but many times at City Council and the Planning Commission. And I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed in my first experience at the budget, because I kind of feel like, okay, we recommended this, but it's going to be somebody else that decides it. And even though I've seen a lot of public input on issues that I wasn't personally involved with, there was a lot of input on it, and the council voted against it. So this just kind of makes me a little bit disappointed.
Well, and just point of clarification, the votes that took place tonight were not council, these are Budget Committee.
Right.
And so it's made up not only of representatives from council, but representatives from the public. So a motion that didn't pass tonight had full public participation and opportunity for that to pass. Just as point of clarification, it wasn't the council that defeated that motion. Thank you. Vice Chair Nordyke.
Briefly, I'm ready to vote on a motion on the budget, but just to explain my vote in advance, I will not vote in support of a budget that cuts youth development or climate action as discussed on principle. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Nordyke. Member Anderson.
I hate to sound like a lawyer, and I see we only have 4 minutes left, but I will tell you that the statute requires we have a budget committee. So we have to have one. That's number one. Number two, this is an exercise for the community and for the staff to come before us and recommend a budget and then defend their position under questioning. And I think that's what's happened here, even if may not have gone the way we wanted, and even if you may be disappointed. It's not just this committee votes and the council should follow it. This committee has their own role to do, and that's to hold the manager and the city staff, hold them accountable for what they presented. And I think that's what happened in this procedure.
Thank you, Member Anderson. That being said, it is getting late. Do I have a motion on the floor to approve the city manager's budget? And I had a second, and now we've had discussion. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of passing the city manager's budget fiscal year 2020, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay. Nay.
Can I have the nay? All right. So motion fails. All right. So I think that means, do we have another meeting? Budget Officer Kelly, will you help us out here?
Sure. We will need to meet again next week because the committee is required to provide a recommendation to the city council.
Excellent. Thank you, Budget Officer Kelly. Thank you, Budget Committee members. Is there any additional comment? Let's take a look. Hold on just a second. Wait, don't pack up. Okay, hold on. All right, is there anyone here who came to testify in front of the Budget Committee who hasn't had a chance? No? Yes. Oh, please. Be
Madam
my
Chair,
guest.
I move we extend the meeting by 5 minutes. Although it's Mr. Sturba, maybe I ought to say 10, but I'll say 5.
All right.
If I could please, procedures are a half hour. Doesn't mean we have to use it, but the procedure is a half hour.
I second the motion.
Yeah,
All
I
right, it's
move we
been moved. It's been moved by Councilor Anderson, seconded by Vice Chair Nordike. Do I have any discussion on the motion? Wonderful. All those in favor of extending the meeting by 30 minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right, motion passes. All right.
Good evening. Ron Sturba at Simca Neighborhood Association. I have something here. It's called a missing link. And what I want to do is to say that our community needs to stick together and close the gap. I'm here and I have been for issues in my neighborhood association that have asked to be here. I'm retired, and I think the people who are behind me and my city councilors have been very supportive of our neighborhood association. So I'm asking for our sound wall for our neighbors up in our community and money to be allocated for that. And also for a continuation with ODOT on the safe route to schools. And I'd be glad to work as a volunteer between the city and the state to see that we get that in our neighborhood. Safe routes. I thank you very much. And I'm going to close it up and let's go home. Thank you.
Thank you, Neighbor Sturbs. Any questions? All right.
Madam Chair, I think that we can quickly get through our next meeting. I think we know what kind of motions to make, and I think that, in the interest of economy and efficiency, we should be able to wrap up our next meeting very quickly. I'm hopeful of that. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vice Chair Nordike. Do I need to set the date?
Madam Chair?
Member Nanki,
If I
yes.
may? I'm not so sure next meeting will go as one predicts that way, especially since city manager has no direction to offset anything as far as financially. So we will not have necessarily a balance, or everything that's amended is going to have to come out of ending fund balance.
Budget Officer Jacobs.
Actually, I had intended to remind the committee that if amendments to the budget are made next week, that our likely recourse would be using ending working capital fund balance.
And point of clarification, do we need to set the meeting date this evening?
We already have noticed the meeting
For the 17th.
on May 15th, I believe.
15th.
Yes, it's May
All right.
15th.
Member Kaiser.
Yeah, and just to add on, I guess, we're kind of putting, if we think that the next meeting, if we're going to have different people, we're going to vote in a different way, we're kind of putting the city manager into a corner to really say, you have to use working capital. So I don't necessarily, I'm kind of surprised by the vote, because we're not giving city manager opportunity to go back and actually look at the budget to see what might work. So we're also assuming everyone's going to be here. Which we already know there's going to be some members of the committee that won't be here. So that's interesting.
Oh, well, hold on. Budget Officer.
A little bit like a heart palpitation. Councilor Nanki said hopefully we get 10.
Me too. Me too. Okay, Councilor Member Hoy.
For the record, I will not be here. I'll be somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean at this time next week.
For the record, I will miss you. All right, and any additional comments? Councilor Young.
For the record, I won't be here next week either.
Well, fantastic. All right, guys. Member Sund,
Is there still time to make a motion?
please.
I motion to recommend the budget as proposed to the city council.
I would second. Or I can't.
Okay, well then can I change one thing in it? And because the discussion, what you just brought up, should have happened before we voted, first of all, because we're all new to it. And so I'll just say that that's a great point. And so let's figure out a way to attorneyize this, whatever, because not that it's necessarily going to change it, but I'm just saying.
Excellent
It's a good
point.
point. You made a good point.
Excellent point, Member Sund. City Attorney Dan Atchison, do you have some comments for us, some guidance?
It would be possible to make a motion for reconsideration from someone who voted for the budget.
Perfect. So we needed a motion for reconsideration first, and then we'll propose the motion. Is that right?
I move to reconsider the budget.
Perfect. I have a motion to reconsider. Do I have a second? A second from Member Anderson. Any discussion to reconsider the motion? Member Anderson.
I'm sorry, I hope this isn't going to irritate people, but I cannot vote for a budget that cuts youth development, DARE, or climate action, so that explains why I'm going to be voting no, and I apologize.
I understand. Thank you, Member Anderson. Councillor Hoy, Member Hoy.
If I can try to assuage the members' concerns, I completely agree with your sentiment. I understand it. We'll never get to a budget, though, if we don't pass the budget. And I would say that you could hope or put your hopes for those programs in the city council. I think that it's likely that we could have a majority on at least the youth development position. I, of course, can't guarantee that because I don't know how other people are going to vote, but I'm guessing that we'd be able to pull that one back. So, but if we don't get a budget passed, I don't know where we'll go from there.
Excellent point, Member Hoy. Member Sund.
And I will echo that, and the reason why, and I will state for the record that I first voted on the original motion to not move forward thinking, but then you clarified and made a great point, which has assuaged me. It's a great word. Assuaded maybe would be the appropriate use of that. And so I also, I'm supportive of the youth development program. It is less likely, in my opinion, given that we will not have another meeting after next week, that if what we're left with is the use of working capital, that the city council will approve the program, given that we've already not passed that motion, and you're going to be gone, and you're going to be gone, and we got others, we don't know who's going to be here, and so the reality is, knowing that, if that's the choice, it comes down to it, that it's more likely that city council will take this up with that respective body and then can work through that process. Less likely that if it's left to, it's going to come out of working capital, that's the choice. So again, I voted no originally. I'm now making this motion because I think that is the best avenue to this, and I do think we need to move forward.
Thank you, Member Sund. Member Nanki, followed by Member Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the discussion takes me back, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago. I had voted against the budget at the Budget Committee because there were things that I was vehemently opposed to. And at the actual budget meeting in front of council, there were 4 people gone. And I was not able to vote in opposition to that, and I actually had to go against everything I believed in to actually make a city budget because there would have been zero budget. We are legally bound to move a budget forward, both from this group and from the city council. So next week, if there's only 10 of us and you are here, what would you do then? Would be my question. To not fulfill our legal role or not.
Excellent
And that's
point.
essentially what it comes down to.
Excellent point, Member Nanki. Thank you. Member Kaiser.
Thanks, and if it helps, I support the youth development program as well. And, to Member Hoy's point, I think I don't know how people are going to vote on it, but I know for myself that I support that.
Just if I can speak to this a little bit, I think it's easy to say, I won't cut. But the fact is that in looking at this particular budget, revenue is an issue, and we're not making that decision tonight. And we do have a legal obligation, policy obligation, as was pointed out repeatedly on this council. So I think it's necessary to move forward, considering the discussion that we've had here and considering the input from the public and the passion around this program and other programs where people have testified. That being said, we had a request for what was the word?
Consideration.
Reconsideration, thank you. Motion to reconsider, and now we need to do the motion again, is that correct?
We have to vote to reconsider.
So this is just to bring it back in front of the body.
Right, so now we have the motion, it's been seconded, we have the discussions, now we're moving to bring Member Sun's motion back in front of the council, the budget committee.
We're moving to
We're moving to have a new motion. Let's have some clarification.
take away the previous motion.
All right.
We are moving to reconsider the city budget, but before we can reconsider the motion on the city budget, we first have to vote to reconsider. So this is just a technical, procedural vote to get the budget in front of us again where we can actually vote on it.
Perfect. All those in favor of reconsidering the city manager's fiscal year 2020 budget, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. All right, now do we have an additional motion? Councilmember Anderson.
Yeah, I move that we approve as a budget committee and pass on to the city council the city manager's proposed budget.
Second.
Moved by Member Anderson, seconded by Member Hoy. Is there any discussion? Vice Chair Nordike.
Oh, that's yours.
You may use it, please.
I'm good.
Okay.
All right. I'm receiving a lot of assurances that certain programs will stay in. I don't like relying on assurances as a general rule, right? Not a big fan. However, I don't like the idea of failing to pass a budget which would not only mean no budget for those programs, but no budget, period, for any of the other essential services that we've discussed. This includes a police force which is not receiving the funding that it should, for all the reasons that we saw earlier today. That includes the fire department services, for all the reasons that we've been discussing, and the Parks and Rec, and so on and so forth. So what I can, however, do is submit testimony in the future urging council to support, fully fund the youth development program, including the job, including the materials, including the 1,000 souls, and all the other great programs that we've been very much concerned by and the public is very much concerned by. And I will also be submitting testimony to encourage this council to support climate action once and for all. There is not a penny for the climate action plan in this current budget, and I confirmed that with staff. And given the fact that stewardship of the environment is written into our materials, that seems to me to be a failing in oversight, which should have been included all along. So, I'm ready to vote now.
Thank you. Any other additional discussion before voting? All right, all those in favor we have a motion to approve the city manager's fiscal year budget 2020. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. All right. Wait, I think I need a motion to adjourn, guys.
Motion to adjourn.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. We're adjourned.